Hey guys, welcome to a new video. Like, comment and subscribe if you enjoy. Without any further interruptions, enjoy the What If. Chapter 7. The March of the Star Cross. The Head Captain's Office, 1st Division Barracks, June 13th. Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni suddenly had a bad feeling as he listened to his 5th Seat officer's reports, the very same feeling that has been bothering him from time to time. It has been a whole year since he started to feel this anxious, without a way for him to pinpoint the cause. It truly was unusual for him to feel as such. That would be all, from the 11th and 9th Divisions. I see, Yamamoto replied to his 5th Seat officer. There really wasn't anything new to the reports from the other divisions, as it has been for quite some time. Nothing new to the reports meant that there were no major problems at the moment, which was a good sign. Moving on to the 10th Division. Yamamoto's eyes widened in surprise, as his subordinate let out his last breath at the hands of the uninvited guests. It turns out that today was the very day he would find out just what had been bothering him. Who goes there? The head captain asked, observing the group of white-clad intruders. They were concealing the identities of themselves with their masks, in addition to their cloaks. Yamamoto noticed that there was a strange familiarity to their attire. We meet for the first time, head captain of the Gote 13, Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni Dono. The figure in the middle spoke up, the casual tone bothering the head captain. They knew who he was, and dared to show such relaxed behavior while intruding his office. Yamamoto was about to retort, when the masked man broke the news. We have come to declare war. One of the masked figures scowled at the poorly attempted dramatics. Although Sternritter, Kurosaki Ichigo had to admit that the messenger had guts if the way he spoke to the head captain was any indication. He didn't know his name, not that he knew the names of any of the Arrancar vanguard. Probably no one in the Sternritter did. Anyway, it kind of reminded him of the way he himself spoke to the head captain a few years earlier. And that was really saying something. I find it quite surprising that it was this easy to infiltrate this office. Despite it being the office, or rather the personal quarters of the head captain of the Gote 13. Isn't the security a little too lax? You might do well to put some more effort into the security measures. As the messenger continued to speak, Ichigo became certain that he really had a death wish if he was trying this hard to get himself killed. To think that his mission was to keep him alive, so that the Arrancar could make his report to His Majesty back in Silburn. Worry not, I am here. What better security can there be, other than myself? Yamamoto replied, causing Ichigo to nod his head in the background. The head captain was someone who had the right to say such words, even if some would think of it as arrogance. Ichigo had gotten a lot better in sensing other people's reiatsu, and he had to admit, the head captain was a monster in his own right. That wasn't even counting his Zanpakuto, which was one of the strongest in existence. I see. The messenger spoke, obviously not convinced at all with the head captain's answer. Ichigo had to try hard to stifle a scoff at that. Those will be your last moment of arrogance, Yamamoto Genryusai. Ichigo really had a hard time to stop himself from sighing as the office became overwhelmed with the uncomfortable silence. He could literally feel the temperature of the room rising, an obvious sign of the head captain's displeasure. Why did this overly confident Arrancar have to tread on such thin ice? It was then, a Hylig file flew into the room with a Shinigami skewered with it. Ichigo had to give some credit to Driscoll for his masterful timing, as it broke the tension in the room. Sasaki. Yamamoto's eyes widened in shock at the sight of his most trusted subordinate's bloodied form, pinned to the wall by a reishi construct. You should praise him, rather than to mourn for him. He was kind enough to show you the path that your kind will follow soon. In other words, you will find yourself dying in despair, after struggling to fight us with everything at your disposal. Yamamoto's eyes twitched in annoyance at hearing such arrogant words, which the Arrancar didn't notice. In 5 days, the Soul Society will be annihilated at the hands of the Wandenreich. A shattering sound could be heard as the head captain released his lieutenant from the Hylig file. Ichigo shivered slightly at the sight of the now-released Ryujin Jaka held tightly in Yamamoto's lone hand, knowing full well of its capability. He wanted nothing more but to clash his sword against it, but this was neither the time nor the place. He at least needed to get his hands on an Asachi if he wanted to fight Yamamoto on equal grounds, and by the time he did, Ichigo expected the head captain to be dead. It was quite sad, really. Those eyes. I can see the questions you have in it. You wish to know who we are, but surely you already understood that we will not provide you with an answer to that. It isn't all that hard for you to deduce that. Ichigo instantly disappeared from his place and appeared in front of the messenger, forming his reishi sword from his Quincy cross. Yamamoto swung his zanpakuto with all his pent-up fury, releasing a wave of flames. Ichigo let out a sigh, blaming the Arrancar at doing such a good job at riling up the old man. Ichigo swung his sword, releasing his own wave of light to match the flames of Ryujin Jaka. He inwardly thanked Jugram for teaching him this nifty technique. Until he actually gets his hands on an Asachi, this was the best he could do with a sword. But it probably was more than enough to match a hastily formed attack on the head captain's part. The two waves clashed, neither one overwhelming the other. It didn't take long before the waves diminished, leaving nothing but scorch marks left on the floor. Yamamoto didn't make another move, surprised that one of the men who merely stood behind the one who goaded him actually succeeded in nullifying his attack. Also, there was something off with the man's reiatsu. Just why did he get the feeling that he knew this man? Sternritter. Kangdu smirked at his fellow Sternritter's show of power. While the other soldats were frozen in their place from the pressure they had felt, Kang merely admired the way Ichigo took care of the situation. They should have departed as soon as their job was done, but apparently their messenger's mouth didn't know when to stop blabbering. We should take our leave, Ichigo stated coldly, reminding the Arrancar that while he was under their protection he most certainly wasn't in charge. Yes, I guess you're right about that. It seems like we've overstayed our welcome, considering our dear head captain's unexpected outburst. Farewell, Yamamoto Genryusai, Ichigo scoffed at the Arrancar, finding the way he tried to assert his control over the mission to be annoying. Anyone could have expected that coming if they heard how he pissed off the old man. The Arrancar just had to make him get a gist of how much of a fierce battle he could have had with Yamaji, which only served in saddening him further. Hold it. Yamamoto released another wave of flame, only to realize that the intruders had already disappeared. They managed to escape. Their reiatsu has already vanished completely from the Seraiti, which means they must have a way to bypass the Shikanmaku completely. Yamamoto thought to himself as he stared at the now non-existent office wall his flames had caused. Genryusai Dono. There is something important I must tell you. They can. Bankai. Yamamoto sighed as his lieutenant stopped breathing. It seemed that a loose end on his part would result in the death of many, after 1,000 years. Sasaki. The Throne Room, Silburn, June 13th. As 7 figures walked into the throne room, the man in the middle eagerly discarded his mask and cloak. The man had a confident smile etched on his face as he walked, and soon noticed a familiar individual on his way to the throne. Aburn, how admirable of you to bow your head before me. I can only presume that you were a bit too impatient, and acted rashly in an attempt to earn some favor. Yes, the man chastised Aburn, who had multiple wounds and burns covering his body, feeling some superiority over the fellow Arrancar. He was tasked with carrying out the declaration of war, while the other had to sneak out in an attempt to do something worthwhile which obviously failed. Are you out of your mind, looters? As if anyone would bow their head before you, Aburn retorted, obviously not in the mood to be belittled by looters out of all people. Excuse me, who do you think you're talking to? Looters glared at Aburn, only to be interrupted by the man of the highest authority. Enough. There was a flash of light, and everyone in the throne room saw that the Arrancar was now missing one of his limbs. Ag! Looters screamed in pain as he clutched the stump of his arm. Ichigo frowned, wondering if His Majesty really had to make him suffer more than necessary. The fact that the Arrancar would be disposed by his hands later on wouldn't change, after all. How many times must I tell you? I will not condone such childish behavior in my presence. I dislike such conflict. Yhwach drawled out, his body leaning out from the throne. Now, let's hear your reports. The soldats who followed on their mission hastily walked out to the sidelines, while the 3 Sternritter kept their posture. Looters was panting against the floor, the pain from his now missing limb straining him. There is no need to overexert yourself. It must be painful for you to even sit upright in your current state. I give you the permission to lay down as you speak. Yhwach said with a little mirth hidden under his voice, which the Sternritter caught on easily. They knew that the Emperor was not finished with his words. As you wish, Your Majesty. Luters replied, only to be cut off by Yhwach's following words. Although, if you're not going to sit, it wouldn't be wrong for me to presume that you have no further use for those legs, yes? You jest, sir. Your humble servant. Luters would never show such arrogance in your presence. To speak to you while lying down disrespectfully on the ground, Your Majesty. Luters stuttered out hurriedly, not wanting to lose his legs in addition to his arm. I see. Then you may begin your report. Yhwach ordered, his hands clasped under his chin. Yes, Your Majesty. We were able to breach Yamamoto Genryusai's office without being spotted. The security was lax, showing Yamamoto's arrogance. Which was later confirmed with his words of stating that his presence itself was enough security. Sternritter was successful in his task, if the way Sasaki Chojiro entered the office while impaled with a Heilig file was any indication. I gave Yamamoto Genryusai the word that the Wandenreich will annihilate the Soul Society in 5 days. Before we took our leave, he released his Zanpakuto and attacked with a massive wave of flame, which was negated by Sternritter. Luters reported, doing his best to refrain from showing any signs of pain while doing so. 5 days, you say? Yhwach questioned. Yes, Your Majesty. It should be a fully sufficient amount of time for both our forces and the Soul Society to prepare for the upcoming. So you speak of the future. Your Majesty. Luters muttered in confusion. Luters looked at the Emperor, unsure of where this conversation was heading towards. Ichigo, on the other hand, knew of what was to come, and merely shut his eyes. He didn't want to see blood being spilled when it wasn't a necessity. Do you consider yourself a prophet, Luters Freegan? What? I asked you a question, Luters. Are you a prophet? Yhwach pressed the Arrancar vanguard for the answer. No, Your Majesty. I am not. If that is the case, why do you speak of the distant future? What I wish to hear of is the present. Yhwach stated, an icy expression creeping up his face. In a blink of an eye, blood exploded from where the Arrancar was a moment ago. Abern, who was kneeling right next to Luters, shivered in fear as the blood splattered on his face. Abern. Yhwach addressed the Arrancar without any change in his expression. Yes, Your Majesty. Abern quickly answered, not wanting to follow his fellow Arrancar's footsteps. I see no reason for me to either praise or rebuke you. Thank you, Your Majesty. Ichigo sighed, as he closed his eyes once more. He could understand His Majesty's treatment of the Arrancar, considering how Quincy blood makes one openly despise hollows. He himself would have been the same, if not for the fact that he had a hollow side inside of him. Even he disliked hollows ever since he started to walk the path of a Quincy, but just because he understood it didn't mean that he had to like it. Your role is now over. I commend you for your services. Yhwach raised a finger before the Arrancar could respond, instantly turning the Arrancar into a puddle of blood with a flash of light. Are you sure that was wise, Your Majesty? I was under the impression that the Arrancar vanguard was a valuable asset to us, considering how they need no formal training for combat to be of use in the war. Jugram questioned the Emperor, while Ichigo took off his mask. Kang and Driscoll quickly followed suit, not finding the mask to be comfortable at all. It is of no consequence. For every Arrancar vanguard I lose, I can just recruit more. Yhwach said as he walked up the stairs of Reishi he formed with each step. He pulled the curtain that obstructed the view of a small space. Hueco Mundo is my domain now. As the dark-skinned female Arrancar was revealed, Ichigo couldn't help but pity the woman. It wasn't that she was weak, considering how she became the rightful queen of Hueco Mundo after Aizen's sealing. She was just outmatched, as the Quincy Emperor stood far above her level. The blonde-haired Arrancar was bound with chains, showing her revealing attire which was actually her resurrection form. Her skin was even less covered than Candice, whose attire was already scandalous enough. Ichigo refrained from letting his eyes wander over the woman, out of respect for both the Arrancar and his girls. Ichigo. Yhwach called out to his successor. Yes, Your Majesty. Ichigo quickly replied. Does it bother you greatly? He realized what the emperor meant, and answered honestly. If I were to say I am comfortable with it, I would be lying. I do understand the usefulness of the Arrancar vanguard, but I honestly think we don't really need them to win this war. It is our war, after all. I see. I shall consider your opinion on the matter. Have you thought about my offer? Ichigo blushed as he remembered the emperor's offer. Yes, and I'm afraid I'll have to refuse, Your Majesty. My hands are already full, and I do not think I need to put my life on the line of danger unnecessarily. A pity. There was no word from Quilge about the spotting of an Arrancar that meets your description, in both forms. He has my orders to leave her and her companions be, and to only subdue her should she interfere. That would be more than enough to repay your debt. Ichigo nodded in gratitude at the emperor. There weren't that many people he owed his life to, and Neliel was one of them. So, you negated Yamamoto's attack in his Shikai? Yhwach asked, his eyes still focused on the former queen of Hueco Mundo. Yes, the messenger just couldn't keep his blabbering down, and riled up the old man pretty badly. I also think Driscoll's perfect timing to send in Sasaki Chojiro skewered with his Heilig file had a hand in his outburst. Ichigo replied. Yhwach turned towards his successor, and examined his face. You seem troubled, my son. Ichigo almost rolled his eyes at the emperor for stating something that obvious. Of course I am. It was the first time I practically participated in killing someone. But such is what war holds, and I know that it will fade over time. I'd rather have the blood of the enemies spilled instead of our own. Excellent. Are you going to take your captive to the Zaraki when we launch our assault? Yhwach asked out of curiosity. Well, she has been training for this day to show her master how much she had progressed. Considering how her master became the captain of the 2nd Division, it would result in one less captain to deal on our part. Needless to mention the drop of morale it would induce to the Shinigami if they saw one of their former captains on the enemy's side. Also, I do not believe she will switch sides on the battlefield. Actually, I would say it'll be more likely for her to persuade Shihoin Yoruichi to change her affiliation considering the circumstances of her reinstatement. I am hoping that this move would eventually lead Urahara Kazuki to actively join our forces. Ichigo stated, eliciting a look of awe from Kang. That is, quite impressive. One decision made on your part leading to the possibility of gaining 3 captain-level Shinigami to our forces. And a special war power at that. Jugram spoke up, receiving a chuckle from Ichigo. Don't get me all flattered, Jugram. We do not know if it will happen as I said, since it is merely a possibility. And I really don't know what to expect from Urahara. One thing I know for sure, is that Shaolin won't join the Gote 13 on her own no matter what. Yhwach hummed as he eyed his strongest Sternritter with a calculating gaze. He was a much better fit for the position of his successor than he had initially thought. His progress in skill and strength was something he had been expecting from the moment he sent one of his Sternritter to recruit him. His drive to become the absolute best, combined with his extraordinary latent ability, was more than enough to place him at the top of the Sternritter after a whole year of holy training. He had even earned Gremmy's respect, a feat probably no one other than the Emperor himself achieved. Ichigo had a good enough relationship with most of the Sternritter, if not all. He was highly respected among the Soldat even before he was named his successor, with his warm nature added to his strength. Jugram could have made a good successor, but he knew that Ichigo would prove to be the best choice. When this war reaches its end, Ichigo would become the perfect ruler the Wandenreich needs. I commend you for your thoughtfulness, and I expect to see the best of your capabilities soon enough. Yhwach said while pulling the curtain back to its original state. I shall not disappoint, Your Majesty. Ichigo replied quickly. But it seems that there was a mistake on my part, in giving the task of declaring war to an Arrancar. 5 days to prepare. We have been ready for nearly a year, ever since you joined the ranks of the Sternritter. Should we just strike when they have yet to ready themselves? It seems only right for us to return the favor from the first war. Surprisingly, it was Kang who spoke up after a short moment of silence. We are at your command, Your Majesty. Be it today or 5 days later, we shall bring you victory no matter the circumstances. That is most reassuring, Sternritter Bersi. Were you successful in stealing the lieutenant's Bankai? Yhwach turned his attention to the large man who had a bored expression on his face. Driscoll quickly erased the expression and replied, "Of course, Your Majesty." The man was pathetic to be honest, but his bankai. It was worthwhile enough for the effort. "I see. You were all dismissed until further notice. Know that I am most pleased with the competency of my Sternritter," Yhwach said as he leaned back against his throne, considering his options on when to launch the first strike. Jugram stayed, as expected from the advisor of the Emperor. The three Sternritter bowed and left the throne room. As soon as they exited the door, Driscoll commented, "Kang, did you do anything in this mission anyway? It seems that Kurosaki had a fun time with the old man. What about you? The task of killing the lieutenant was given to both of us. And you expected me to do something on that mission." Kang replied with no distinguishable shift in expression. "He has a point, Driscoll. It's not like Kang wouldn't have been able to succeed the task on his own." "And just how many did you kill anyway?" Ichigo drawled out. "Dunno, maybe a little over 100, give or take about 20. Driscoll replied nonchalantly. 100 kill counts in what, 2 minutes? Not bad, Driscoll." Ichigo inwardly sighed, as he felt the weight of war that was to come. He would have to kill, that was for sure. How many? That, he was unsure about. Ichigo was about to take his leave, when he felt someone drape his arm over his shoulder. "Hello, Askin, should I assume that you want to hear about how the mission went?" Ichigo said without even sparing a look towards the said person. "Ah, Ichigo, how did you know it was me? I didn't even say a word yet," Askin exclaimed in mock surprise. Ichigo couldn't help but roll his eyes at the man's antics. He was a bit too much like Urahara, and they would probably get along reasonably well in his opinion. "No one does that to me except Bambi. You certainly aren't her," Ichigo deadpanned. Askin let out a gasp which was obviously exaggerated. "You wound me, Ichigo. Must you be so cold just because of the fact that I'm biologically male? I suppose that was to be expected from the man who owns a harem, but still. Yes, let go of me and I'll tell you what happened. The Arrancar vanguard we went on the mission with was just too much similar to you, that I couldn't help but be worried for your well-being," Ichigo muttered, which brought out a rare grin from Kangdu. "If you put it that way, I think I'm inclined to agree with you. They have the same, holier-than-thou, atmosphere around them, don't they?" Kang added his own piece. Ichigo and Driscoll erupted in laughter, while Askin was shell-shocked at hearing that. "Me, holier-than-thou? You've gotta be joking." Ichigo stared at Askin as if he was looking at something weird. "I think it's a little disconcerting if you didn't know about it." "Agreed." Kang nodded in agreement. Askin looked at the two in disbelief for a moment, and then held his head up high. "How should I know if I had such attitude, when I'm just that great?" Ichigo collapsed while laughing at that point, while Kang scrunched his nose in distaste. Driscoll was nowhere to be seen, which none of the three Sternritter particularly cared. "Anyway, you said you'll tell me about your mission. So, fine, let's go grab some lunch, and I'll tell you about it there." Ichigo turned towards the direction where the mess hall was at, and started to walk away. "All right, lunch it is. Wait a second, won't your girlfriends be there at this time?" Askin asked, realizing that he had been tricked. "Probably," Ichigo shrugged, a smirk forming on his face. Urahara Shoten, Karakura Town, June 13th, an hour earlier. Urahara Kazuki stared at the strangely dressed Arrancar who happened to appear out of nowhere, now standing on his favorite table. He really had no idea of why something like this had to happen on a fine day like this. "So, Arrancar-san, I don't think I've caught your name yet. Care to indulge me?" Kazuki asked while adopting his usual mask of cheeriness. The said Arrancar didn't even notice the cold calculative gaze of the mastermind. "Abern. It's a Sugiaro Abern if you prefer the full name. But you seem to be mistaken about something." "Me, an Arrancar you say?" Abern's expression hardened as he raised his arm, a Quincy cross slipping out of his sleeve. "I am no Arrancar." Before Abern could form a reishi weapon, Kazuki shut his fan as he let out a sigh, and pointed his finger towards Abern. "Bakudo number 61, Raikujokuro. Bakudo number 63, Seijo Sabaku." "What?" Abern gasped, as 6 beams of light slammed into his body at the first Kido. His arms were bound to his torso with ropes of light as the second Kido made contact. If you wish for a fight, you should have just asked. You see Abern-san, I have the perfect place in mind. You should know that it was quite rude of you to try to fight me in my shop. Kazuki said cheerily as he dragged Abern towards his underground training area. I've been expecting something to happen soon, but an errand car with a Quincy cross. Things are going to become quite interesting. Abern put up little resistance as he noticed that Kazuki had every intention of releasing him from his binds for whatever reason. When they reached the ladder that led to the training area, Kazuki placed Abern right in front of it. Abern suddenly had a bad feeling, which became a reality barely a moment later. I wish you a fun ride, Abern-san, Kazuki said jovially as he shoved the errand car with his foot. Abern tried to protest, only to be silenced with the pain as Kazuki's wooden sandals dug into his back. Ah! Unfortunately Abern had landed headfirst to the ground, not being able to shift his posture with all the binds restricting his movement. Kazuki landed gracefully right in front of Abern's face, who was groaning in pain. Now let's see what you're made of, Abern-san, Kazuki said, as he released the binds on the errand car. Couldn't you have shown some leniency and at least let me get down on my own? Abern complained, already falling for Kazuki's mask of deception. Nope, now get up and show me what you can do. If that is your death wish, it would be wrong of me to ignore it. Abern muttered, his arrogance showing from his words. A crescent-shaped reishi construct formed from his Quincy cross, with 4 cannon-like protrusions. Kazuki's eyes gleamed as he confirmed the technique as a Quincy's reishi manipulation. Now if only he could find out about how that was possible. So, Abern-san, I know that you are an errand car, but you seem to be quite affronted by that claim. Do you perhaps consider yourself as a Quincy? Abern furrowed his brows at Kazuki's words. Consider. I do not consider myself as a Quincy, Urahara Kazuki. I am a Quincy, Abern yelled as he fired blasts of reishi from his weapon. Kazuki's eyes widened at the power behind the attacks, a little surprised by it. This is, maybe a little lower than Ishida-san's level. I wonder if this is the Quincy King's doing. Abern's eyes shone with glee as he thought his attack had made contact with Kazuki, only to be surprised when there was nothing behind the clouds of dust that cleared up. You seem to be rather worked up, Abern-san. Might I recommend you to put a little more effort in your awareness of the surroundings? Kazuki said as his Zanpakuto slid out of its sheath that took the form of a cane. He raised his brows as the blade met with Abern's skin, facing a considerable amount of resistance. He recognized it as the errand car's Hierro, but it wasn't all that strong in his opinion if he was able to actually cut it without releasing Benihime. Abern disappeared with a buzz of sound, putting some distance between him and Kazuki. He started to fire a barrage of reishi blasts, only to miss his target each and every time. What's wrong, Urahara Kazuki? Can't keep up with me anymore. You should show some effort by at least using your bankai. Abern taunted, completely ignoring the fact that he had failed to land a clean hit on Kazuki the whole time. Bankai, Kazuki thought to himself, was this errand car, or Quincy, or whatever he was, under the impression that he had released Benihime's Shikai? Or was there another reason that caused him to mention the word? Kazuki considered his options, and decided to play along for a little amusement. Oh, well, I suppose it is a little hard for me to keep up with my Shikai. But are you sure you want to see my bankai? I mean, no one knows about my bankai because every single one of them died by my hands. A malicious grin formed on Abern's face, confirming Kazuki's suspicion of his enemy having an ulterior motive. You think your words scare me, Urahara. Not only will someone walk away alive with the knowledge of your bankai today, but you will never be able to wield it again. Abern's grin grew as Kazuki's hand settled on his Zanpakuto, which was still in its sealed state. Kazuki almost sweat dropped at the sight of Abern practically screaming his objective out loud. Seriously, did this man even know what the word, subtle, meant? Oh, you really leave me no choice then. Bankai, Kazuki said as he stifled a snicker, releasing a considerable amount of reiatsu to fake the release of his bankai. In reality, all he did was to release his shikai without using the release phrase. Abern's eyes gleamed as crimson-red reiatsu exploded around Kazuki, thinking that he had successfully tricked the supposed most intelligent man in the three worlds. The most intelligent man, yeah right. Ha, say goodbye to your Bankai, Urahara Kazuki. Abern shouted in glee as he held up a medallion. What he wasn't expecting was the medallion to not respond at all. What? Ah, so you were trying to do something to my Bankai. You really must learn to be a little more subtle if you are to succeed in your task, Abern-san. I doubt that anyone would fall for it if you're practically screaming at them to use their Bankai. The Quincy King really won't be pleased with your incompetency. Kazuki smirked as he noticed Abern shivering at the mention of the Quincy King. So Yhwach really has returned, and he's making his move. I suppose this Arrancar should be a mere pawn to him then. Considering how much the Quincy fear hollows on their instinctual level, the thought of an Arrancar holding a high position in their army is quite laughable. How is your Bankai unaffected? Abern muttered in disbelief, not understanding the situation quite yet. Oh, you mean this? Kazuki raised his Zanpakuto, and answered Abern's question cheerfully. This is Benihime, my Zanpakuto's Shikai form. Oh my, you really aren't the sharpest tool in the shed if you fell for this. I wasn't even using my Shikai when you mentioned my Bankai, if you hadn't noticed yet, Abern-san. Does this answer satisfy you? You tricked me. Of course I did, Abern-san. Did you expect anything better from me? I don't really have the reputation of fighting fair if you didn't know already. Nake, Benihime. Kazuki slashed down with his sword, firing a crimson-red blast of energy at Abern. Abern failed to react, still in shock at being fooled so easily. He sighed in disappointment when Abern was engulfed with the blast, not meeting his standards even at its lowest. Even Kurosaki-san, when he first learned his Zanpakuto's name, was more amusing than this. Abern emerged from the cloud of dust caused by the blast, covered with burns all over his body. He screamed in rage and started to fire more reishi blasts of his own, albeit failing spectacularly at hitting his target. It didn't take long for Kazuki to figure out that the Arrancar had nothing more on his sleeve. Ah, this won't really help me as much as I thought. You're just a foot soldier, aren't you, Abern-san? I doubt that the Quincy King's main forces would be like this, short on both power and intelligence. Kazuki sighed, and bound Abern again with the repeat of his earlier Bakudo. It really was a waste of time on his part. So, Abern-san, what does the medal do? Seal our Bankai. Destroy it. I wonder what it could do. Kazuki said as he held the medallion in his hand. I'm quite certain that I won't be able to get any important information out of you, since it's obvious that you don't hold an important position in Yhwach's army, but I suppose I'll just ask. Do you know the name Kurosaki Ichigo by any chance? Kazuki asked, searching for any kind of reaction at the mention of Ichigo's name. Abern's eyes widened as he recognized the name, much to Kazuki's delight. Abern remembered that the Sternritter, had the same name if his memory served him correct, but why was Urahara Kazuki asking about him? He regretted not reading about Urahara Kazuki from the Daiden more thoroughly. Oh, you do know about him. Is he under the banner of Yhwach? Abern knew that the longer he stayed here, the more Kazuki would find out from him. He wasn't expecting something like this when he decided to seek the special war power Urahara Kazuki, and attempt to steal his Bankai. He could only hope that His Majesty would show mercy for this, but part of him doubted that he would be that lucky. Kazuki quickly took a step back as the shadows erupted behind Abern and engulfed him. The Bakudo on him melted as it made contact with the shadow, and Abern stood firmly once more. Don't worry, this shadow only conceals those who have been chosen. Abern muttered, and disappeared into the shadows. That wasn't a Garganta, Kazuki muttered while holding the medallion tightly, a little disappointed at the amount of information he was able to gain. So, Kurosaki-san was with the Quincy King all this time. I wonder if Kurosaki-san is still pissed at me. Kazuki decided to leave the job of cleaning the mess for later, and return to the shop. He was certain that the war would break out anytime soon, and he needed to warn Yoruichi about it. He would be too much of a bad friend if he neglected to inform her of such important matter. Little did he know that the said person was already aware that things were going to get messy. Urahara-san, we have a problem. When Kazuki heard a familiar female voice as soon as he set his foot back into his shop, he just knew that he was in for a very long day. The 1st Division Barracks, June 13. The entirety of the Gote 13 was assembled to commemorate the unfortunate passing of the 1st Division Lieutenant, Sasaki Chojiro. Every Shinigami was present, even the ones who were on active duty had returned temporarily to attend. They listened solemnly as the 6th Division Captain Kuchiki Byakuya spoke of the fallen lieutenant. Sasaki Chojiro Tadaoki was a Shinigami deserving of the captain's post. According to the records, he had mastered his Bankai before most of our captains were even born. And yet, he had never used the ability in the presence of others ever since the founding of the Gote 13. As Byakuya went on, Yamamoto merely stared at the pyre while lost in his own thoughts. He had already realized that the upcoming threat could only be the Quincy. All the signs they showed were pointing to the same direction, and he also now understood why one of the intruders had a disturbing Reiatsu. Who could it be, other than the former substitute Shinigami who had disappeared a year ago? Kuretsuchi Mayuri was never going to hear the end of this from the other captains, but that was not the main problem. How many of the Shinigami's morale will be affected negatively just from the knowledge that the hero of the Winter War was now their enemy? What was he to expect from the reinstated captains who claimed themselves as Kurosaki Ichigo's allies when they fought against Aizen? But he put all that matters aside for now. Sasaki Chojiro had sworn to support Yamamoto Genryusai as his lieutenant for as long as they both should live. That man used his Bankai in battle for the first time, and lost his life. Young as we are, cannot possibly fathom the grief the head captain is experiencing at the moment. There was a long silence, before Yamamoto spoke. Light the flames. The members of the Kido Corps who had been standing at the sidelines stepped forward and raised their blazing torches, and lit the pyre. If it is war you want, you watch. Then so be it. Silburn, June 13. There is a report from the 1st Jagdarmy. Special war power Urahara Kazuki has been sighted in Hueco Mundo with 3 notable individuals, Inoue Orihime, Yasutora Sato, and Ishida Ryu. I see. The time has come much earlier than I thought. Relay my orders to the 1st Jagdarmy, to keep Urahara Kazuki occupied. Yhwach said as he stood up from his throne. Your Majesty, where are you going? Must you ask the obvious, Soldat? To the Soul Society, of course. I cannot possibly fathom the reason Urahara Kazuki decided to take a stroll to Hueco Mundo, but there is only one special war power available to the Soul Society at the moment. What better time to bring them to their knees? Yhwach chuckled as he continued his way. He noticed that the youngest child of the Ishida was also in Hueco Mundo, but didn't comment. Oh, send word to the Sternritter. The Wandenreich will invade the Soul Society, as of now. A direct order from the Emperor to the Sternritter. All participants of the first invasion is to gather at the Gate of Sun immediately. As the Gate of the Sun was being activated, Jugram stood at the head of the formation with Ichigo. The other Sternritter were lined up behind them, awaiting for the activation of the Gate of the Sun. It didn't take long for the Gate of the Sun to be ready for use, the opening of war. Don't die, you dolts, Ichigo said as he walked into the gate. Jugram let a faint smile slip on his face and followed suit without a word. What he said, Kang commented, and disappeared through the gate. Such kind words, as expected from Sir Ichigo. I shall not disappoint and put the villains down where they belong. Mask practically ran through the gate, while some of the Sternritter facepalmed at his antics. Whatever, it's not like I need him to worry about me. Bambietta frowned. But you like it when he worries about you. Jazelle pointed out, which Bambietta answered without thinking ahead. Well, yeah. But, shit. Bambietta disappeared through the gate before any of them could tease her, causing the girls to giggle. Wait for me, Bambi-chan. You know, the Shinigami will be shocked out of their minds when you show up wearing that. Candice commented, which Shaolin, aka Sui-Feng, replied easily. The color white doesn't go well with an assassin like me, but I'll admit that this is better in a fashionable way. And should I really care about what they would think about me? No, I suppose not. Do you think your master will molest you if she sees you wearing that? Candice teased, which caused Shaolin to blush instantly. That is none of your concern. You bitches, will you just shut up? We're the last ones left. Liltato muttered. Fine. Candice huffed and entered the gate, while Meninas merely stared at it. What's on your mind, Meni? It's just. I lost the bet. Menina's answered Liltado's question. Shaolin raised her brows at that part, a little curious of the subject. What kind of bet would that be? I bet that Bambietta would start dating Ichigo before the war starts, and Candice bet on after. The winner becomes the official second. It's not that important but still. Menina's sighed. Oh. Liltado rolled her eyes, and shoved Menina's into the gate. Lil. Shaolin couldn't help but grin a little at that. Shaolin and Liltado stared at each other for a moment, and walked into the gate with a faint smile. 1st Division Barracks, Emergency Captains Meeting, June 13th. Their true identity is the Quincy. We do not know of how they survived or expanded their forces, but there are 2 important points that are worth our attention. They have the means to easily bypass the Shikanmaku, which is the main source of defense we had against intruders. Also, according to Lieutenant Sasaki's last words, they can either seal or neutralize our Bankai. Mayuri explained their current situation, only to be interrupted by the head captain himself. That would be enough, Captain Kuretsuchi. The captains present were surprised that there was some venom seeping from the way head captain addressed the 12th Division captain. What I require from you is the location of their headquarters. I'm afraid we possess no knowledge on that matter. Mayuri replied. I see. Then we have no way to launch an offensive on our part. All captains are to prepare for the upcoming battle. The vanguard of the enemy declared that the war would commence in 5 days' time, but it would be naive of us to trust those fiends' words. They could be planning a sneak attack even at this moment, Yamamoto said, gaining a questioning gaze from one captain. But wasn't it us who did such an heinous act during the First War, head captain? Hana thought to herself. She wasn't really one to talk since she herself was an active participant during that time, but what right did they have to degrade the enemy should they repay them in the same manner? Make all necessary preparations for battle immediately. We will not allow the enemy to catch us off guard for the second. Yamamoto paused in the midst of his words, as he felt the large concentrations of Raryoku all over the Seraiti. No, they could see the pillars of condensed reishi all over the Seraiti, from where the wall had been burned to ashes by Yamamoto himself. Speak of the devil, Shunsui muttered, as he adjusted his kimono. What an impatient bunch. They actually launched a sneak attack on the very day they declared war on us. Toshiro said in disbelief. Head captain, your orders. Komamura asked in an almost growling manner. Yamamoto slammed his staff to the floor, the temperature in the office rising drastically. Alert the Seraiti of the situation with Tente Kura. All captains are to return to their respective divisions and prepare a counterattack. The 5th Division will be tasked with the protection of the 4th Division. Head out immediately. Yes, sir. As the captains quickly left for each of their destinations, Yamamoto noticed that Captain Kuretsuchi hadn't left yet. Why are you still here, Captain Kuretsuchi? Oh, it's just to say I told you so. Didn't I constantly warn you of the possibility of this happening ever since I encountered the Quincy Ryoka? Had you listened to me back then, we would have been obviously better prepared. Yamamoto's grip on his staff tightened at the 12th Division captain's disrespectful words. He had half a mind to burn the brat alive right and there, but refrained himself from doing so. It was an emergency situation, and the said scientist was a valuable asset to the Gote 13 in such time of crisis. Actually, he had something to say to the disrespectful captain this time that would shut him up. As that's so, and what do you have to say for yourself when the former substitute Shinigami Kurosaki Ichigo has joined their forces, most likely because of your division's atrocious experiments? Yamamoto asked back to the captain, eliciting a look of surprise. What? How? Know that the drop of morale among our forces when this piece of information is revealed, lies on your shoulders, Captain Kuretsuchi. Now if you're done with your petty business, head to your division immediately. Yes, head captain, Mayuri replied while gritting his teeth. Yamamoto glared at the pillars of light as he searched for the murderer of his lieutenant. He had yet to say farewell, and he will only do so when the said person's head was on his sword. Hueco Mundo, June 13th. Quilge OP looked up as he sensed a newcomer. He hoped that this new opponent would prove to be a competent one, since his earlier opponents were barely worth his time. The 3 female Arankar who happened to be the queen of Hueco Mundo's subordinates could pass as an entertainment, if he was being honest. But they were far from requiring his full strength. Ishida Yuryu's eyes widened in surprise at the sight of 3 female Arankar sprawled over the ruins of Las Noches. Quilge blinked at the sight of the newcomer, and proceeded to wipe his glasses. Uryu looked at him in confusion, only for it to change to an expression of surprise as he saw the Quincy Zycon-like insignia on the man's uniform. I did not expect to see you here," Quilge muttered as he put his glasses back on. "You know me?" Uryu asked, already realizing that the man in front of him was one of the Quincy King's forces. "Oh, of course, I do. Ishida Uryu. Why do you seem surprised by that fact? Perhaps you thought we didn't know about your existence, since no one was sent to recruit you." Yuryu's expression hardened as he listened to Quilge's words. "I suppose I would have to admit that a part of me did think of that possibility. But no, I was merely surprised when I noticed your insignia. So, the Quincy King has finally decided to make his move." Quilge raised his brows, not expecting such response as he wasn't aware of the fact that the young Ishida had any prior knowledge of His Majesty or the Wandenreich. He soon came to the conclusion that the knowledge was either passed on from the older Ishidas or provided by someone else. Urahara Kazuki if he were to place a bet. Quincy King. No, young Ishida, it's the Emperor of the Wandenreich now. But why the animosity to His Majesty? As a Quincy you should know that His Majesty is a man who deserves to be respected. Even your friend, Kurosaki Ichigo respects the Emperor greatly after all." Quilge exclaimed, a confident smirk building on his lips. "What? Why the hell would Kurosaki? Don't tell me that he doesn't even know," Uryu said as he furrowed his brows. "Doesn't know of what? Is it so hard to believe that your friend is one of the most loyal followers of His Majesty?" Quilge asked as he ran his finger down the blade of his sword. He stared at the blood that stained his glove disdainfully, and dissolved the sword back to Reishi. Such filthy blood! Even though he understood His Majesty's reasoning for using the Arankar as their vanguard, he himself wanted nothing more but to wipe out those good-for-nothing vermins. The fact that his own mother is dead because of the Oswalin. Uryu almost screamed out loud, which earned a dumbfounded look from Quilge. Oh, I see now, so that was the reason of your antagonistic reaction towards His Majesty. Of course Kurosaki knows of it, Ishida Uryu. Did you think that he was serving His Majesty under our deception? But I suppose you don't even know half of the reason that caused Kurosaki to actively hate the Shinigami. Quilge chuckled in amusement. Uryu stared at the Quincy in disbelief for a few seconds, and let out a sigh. "You don't have to try that hard to mess with my head. Kurosaki would never turn his back on his friends, no matter what. If you thought your words could make me doubt him, you're sorely mistaken." Quilge sent a look of mild annoyance at the younger Quincy, not amused at the fact that Uryu thought of his words as a little mind game that held no purpose. It was too bad for him, that he was not in the mood for some friendly explanation time. Quilge merely smirked and gathered Reishi around his feet, and appeared in front of Uryu. Uryu found himself at the receiving end of the enemy's sword tip, and stepped back a considerable distance while using his Harenkyaku. "So you wish to fight? Let's say, I am in need of some entertainment and leave it at that. I'll have to introduce myself to you properly first. I am the Sternritter, J, Executive Hunting Captain of the 1st Jagdarmy, Quilge Op. If you win, I shall tell you the reason Kurosaki hates the Shinigami. If you lose, you will be brought back to the Wandenreich, where all Quincy belong." Quilge dashed towards Uryu at a speed he had quite the trouble of following. "He's fast," Uryu thought as Quilge attempted to pierce him with his sword. Uryu redirected his attack by forming his Ginrei Kojaku and smashing it into the side of Quilge's blade, and fired a barrage of arrows at point blank. Yuryu's eyes widened in shock as he noticed that his arrows failed to harm the opposing Quincy, not even leaving a scratch on his skin. "The power behind your arrows aren't all that bad. It barely meets the Echt standards, which is quite the feat for a gemist really. You just might have made it into our ranks as a gemist had you joined earlier." Quilge drawled as he forcibly shattered Yuryu's Ginrei Kojaku and placed his sword against his throat. It seemed that he wouldn't be able to get his entertainment after all. Just what's so important about the whole blood thing anyway? I know that the Oswalin forcibly removes any gemist Quincy's powers, but what actually makes an Echt different from a gemist? You're obviously not talking about superiority from blood purity. Uryu asked in confusion, a little wary at the sword tip aimed at his throat. Quilge merely chuckled at the young Quincy's ignorance. You don't even know what differentiates an ect from a gemist. That's quite odd. Your father should have taught you the difference in the earlier stages of your holy training, considering the fact that he is the last ect Quincy alive in the world of the living. You see, young Ishida, an ect Quincy is not only born with more power, but they are gifted with the ability to use the blood naturally. Uryu sent a questioning gaze at this, his frustration at his own father growing every moment. Oh, so you do not even know of the blood. It's actually quite surprising that your arrows pack such power without being empowered by blood artery. You see, the blood is what we call a technique that can either empower your offensive ability, which is the blood artery, or used to strengthen our natural defense and regeneration, the blood vene. A gemist must learn from an ect to utilize the blood properly, which I can easily deduce from your response that your father didn't train you in it. If you were trained in the blood, you just might be on par if not above some of the Sternritter. But without it, you're no match for any of us. Uryu seethed in frustration at Rukin for not even informing him of such a technique. A moment later, a stray thought came across his mind. When Rukin said I lacked the talent as a Quincy when I was younger, he was implying that I was a gemist unlike himself. Tch. Quilge laughed upon hearing Yuryu's words. The blood vene is somewhat similar to the Arrancar's Hierro, but I'd say blood vene is above it on the pure defensive aspect. It's a shame that you cannot use the blood, as you would have proved to be a much more formidable opponent with it. Without the blood, you are just too vulnerable to any kind of attack. Such as this. Quilge smirked as he left a deep gash on Yuryu's side, causing the younger Quincy to gasp in pain. Oh, it was meant to split your stomach. I didn't expect you to be able to react to that. Uryu gritted his teeth as struggled to keep his posture, the stinging pain from his side bothering him greatly. He stepped back while clutching his side, knowing that with a wound of this caliber he really couldn't face this opponent alone. Not that he thought he would be able to gain the upper hand even without it. But he needed to stall some time at the least, or bring out an opening. Since when did a Quincy use a sword as a main weapon anyway? It's ridiculous. An Ishida by blood, through and through. We've been using swords long before Ishida Soken left the Wandenreich, if you insist to know. I've heard that the Ishidas were known stickers to the old-fashioned ways, but I must say, you really are awfully outdated. Quilge replied as his lips formed a smirk. If all the Quincy under your king share the same sentiment, I refuse to acknowledge them as a Quincy. Uryu muttered as he executed the very best Harenkyaku in his capability to gain some distance, despite the pain from his side proving to be a hindrance to his movement. Uryu quickly formed his Ginrei Kojaku once more, and started to fire volley after volley of reishi-formed arrows. The arrows were considerably more powerful than his arrows in the world of the living due to the reishi-rich environment of Hueco Mundo. Quilge sighed as he gracefully weaved through the rain of arrows, swatting away any of the projectiles he couldn't dodge. It didn't take more than 30 seconds until he had Uryu under his mercy once more, and sent a look of warning that he really could kill him if he wanted to do so. Apparently I owe a favor to Kurosaki, so I would have to refrain from harming you, or your friends too badly. Yuryu's eyes widened as he realized that Quilge had known what he had been trying to do from the beginning. You have potential, Ishida Uryu. With the proper training, you would most likely surpass even myself. It's just too bad that you didn't have the chance. Now, shouldn't your friends come out if they don't want to see you unnecessarily harmed further? Wait, don't hurt Ishida-kun. Quilge's eyebrows arched upon hearing a voice that belonged to a orange-haired female, who he easily noticed as one Inoue Orihime. He knew that she would have been considered to be a special war power if her powers did not have a noticeable limit. His eyes moved on to a tall, muscular man with dark skin who he easily recognized as Yasutaro Sato. It seemed that all of Kurosaki's friends from the past had decided to visit Hueco Mundo for some reason. And he understood the reason a moment later upon seeing a childlike Arrancar hanging on the said man's shoulder. Ah, I see. Apparently your friends came to Hueco Mundo at that particular Arrancar's request. Yes, Uryu looked like he wanted to refute Quilge's words, only to give up on that thought at seeing Quilge's knowing look. You seem to be a bit too much well informed about us. What did you people do to Kurosaki to learn such information? Oh, Don't you know when to give up? We didn't do anything to Kurosaki, despite your belief that we are using him as we see fit. You would be quite surprised at just how well he adjusted to the Wandenreich. Some would say, he actually might be much more happier compared to the time he spent in the world of the living. Quilge chuckled as the three teenagers' expression changed into one of disbelief, although he wasn't sure about Yasutora. As I was saying, I could easily deduce the reason your little band decided to visit Hueco Mundo, all thanks to one little information I had from the very start. Nelly L2 Odelschwenk, or should I say Nell in that childlike form? To say that everyone except Quilge himself was surprised would have been an understatement. Ah, the bad man knowth my name. Nell squeaked in surprise, eliciting a feral grin from the bad man. Of course, you see, I was requested, or rather ordered to leave Nelly 2 Odelschwenk and her companions unharmed. None of the Quincy of the Wandenreich particularly cares about the well-being of Arrancars, with only one exception. It isn't all that hard for you to deduce the identity of the said person, won't you agree? Ichigo Ofkid for my, T. Nell asked with her eyes sparkling with joy, completely disregarding the situation. Well, now wasn't that obvious? You see, apparently Kurosaki happens to owe a debt to you. I do not know the specifics of the debt, but he explicitly stated that you are under his protection. You were quite lucky to have Kurosaki in your debt, Arrancar. Quilge said while he adjusted his cap with the unoccupied hand. I remember thawing him from Neutra, but Nell knew that she had failed to subdue Neutra at the end, but it seemed that Ichigo thought of it to be enough for him to owe a debt to her. Yuryu's eyes narrowed as he pondered about Quilge's words. Wait a second, ordered, are you saying that Kurosaki holds a higher position than you? Uryu questioned with a little doubt, not believing his own words all that much even as he asked. Quilge sighed in as he realized that he had apparently slipped too much information, not that it was any important at this point. The time of war has already come after all. If I say that you're right in your assumption, will you finally accept the fact that Kurosaki is under His Majesty's service on his own free will? I'd rather not have to say it again, since stating the obvious is not my favorite activity. And also, Uryu blinked in surprise as Quilge was swept away from his place in front of him, a giant fist in the place he was a second ago. What in the world is that beast? Quilge muttered as he separated himself from the wall he was embedded in, and cracked his neck. Apparently a muscular beast with a deer skull on its head accompanied with long thick manes had smashed him with its fist. He looked a little farther and recognized three figures standing at some distance, away from the giant beast. Don't forget about us. Did you think we were out of the fight for good? Mila Rose growled. I did warn you, that you shouldn't take us lightly. Sung Sun said with a calm expression, which was soon followed by her fellow Frashion. Show this pompous four-eyed asshole just what you're made of. Aeon. Apache cried out, a roar from the beast backing up her words. Quilge observed the beast and came to the conclusion that it would be unwise of him to face the beast in his current state. When he placed his hand on the Leiden hand, Uryu couldn't help but let out a gasp as he realized what the other Quincy was about to do. Quilge merely chuckled and prepared for the activation of his Vollständig. Young Ishida, as I said, you are awfully outdated. This isn't the Quincy. Let's still. The insignia of the Wandenreich on the Leiden hand flared with concentrated Raryoku, and soon exploded in a giant pillar of reishi with a large Quincy cross at its tip around Quilge. Uryu gaped at the sheer amount of reishi that had gathered around Quilge, which surpassed anything he had ever seen. As the pillar of reishi started to diminish, the changed form of Quilge was revealed. With the wings of reishi and a halo-like reishi construct on his head, Quilge could be easily considered to have an angel-like appearance. This, Ishida Uryu, is the perfected version of the Quincy. Let's still, the Quincy, Vollständig. Unlike the Let's still, which is a relic of the past. The Vollständig allows us to retain our power. You should know what kind of power comes upon the use of the Let's still, but the Vollständig surpasses that of the Let's still. It truly is the completion of a Quincy's power, which surpasses the Shinigami's Bankai. Quilge frowned as he sensed a well-hidden Reiatsu with his enhanced spiritual awareness, which comes with the Vollständig. Oh, it seems that you had more company, quite well hidden if I might add. Before he could further comment on that, another roar from Aeon could be heard. How troublesome. Quilge muttered as he raised a hand to block Aeon's fist, only for his eyes to widen in surprise at the moment of contact. Aeon's fist simply smashed Quilge's arm, and sent the man flying into the air. Yeah, put that monkey into his place, Aeon. Those freaky eyes were giving me the creeps. Apache cheered as Aeon pounced at the sprawled form of Quilge, and started to pulverize the Quincy into the ground. Orihime shielded Nell's eyes from the gruesome scene, while Ryu grimaced at the sight. He wasn't all that sure if the Quincy was telling him the truth about Kurosaki or not, but he had a sinking feeling that the Quincy just might be speaking of the truth. If that was the case, was this Quincy truly his enemy? But why would Kurosaki blindly follow the man that killed his mother? This is too much. He's completely out of control. Chad muttered, shocked at the brutal show of primitive violence. There was no skill or technique or whatsoever. The only thing he could see was the sheer power of the beast being fully unleashed at the opponent. Aeon is a monster created by the fusion of our 3 left arms. He ain't short on power, but he ain't smart enough to listen to our orders either. I'll give ya a little piece of advice, kids. Run for your lives if you don't want to lose 'em, Apache said with a smirk. Well, the smug bastard got what he deserves. He's got nothing on Aeon, whatever the technique he used. Mila Rose commented. Don't be so sure yet. He fought us 3 on himself and won without a scratch. Sung Sun chastised the other Arrancar. The 3 Arrancar's attention was swiftly brought back to the fight, when they heard a sound of explosion vaguely different than the ones caused by Aeon's fists. They gasped in surprise at the sight in front of them as Aeon toppled for a moment, and fell backwards to the ground. As I said, the Quincy. Vollständig is the completion of a Quincy's power. You were quite mistaken if you expected this mindless beast to win against myself in this perfect form, but I suppose its power is quite impressive. I'd rather not have its hands on myself again, and I think I would prefer this instead of tainting myself with this wicked beast. Quilge drawled as he lazily adjusted his neck, which was obviously broken. He then fired a Hylig file at Aeon from the tip of his reishi sword, which immediately morphed into a giant cage at contact. Grrrg. Aeon roared as it slammed into the cage, the bars of its prison not even budging at the beast's phenomenal strength. Aeon. The Trace Bestia yelled, only to slump to the ground a moment later with identical holes formed on their chest. Quilge flicked his sword to remove the blood of the Arrancars from the blade, and turned to the other group. Allow me to introduce myself properly to the newcomers. I am the executive hunting captain of the 1st Jagdarmy, the Sternritter, J, as in, the jail, Quilge Op. Would you show some courtesy and reveal yourself now, Urahara Kazuki? There was a silence with uncertain looks traded by the 3 teenagers, soon broken with the usual jovial voice of the former 12th Division captain who appeared besides Ryu. My, it seems that your Quincy. Vollständig heightens your spiritual awareness, if you were able to sense me. Ishida-san, may I suggest a tactical retreat for the moment? It seems that we are quite outnumbered, and myself and Pesci-san successfully secured our main objective. Ryu looked around, and saw that they were indeed outnumbered. The soldats under Quilge's command were surrounding the group with their reishi weapons aimed to fire at their captain's command. I'm afraid that won't do, Urahara Kazuki. You see, the first invasion has commenced as soon as I reported your presence in Hueco Mundo to His Majesty. My next orders are to delay you with everything at my disposal. With Inoue Orihime's presence here, I suppose I am allowed to be a little rough even to Kurosaki's friends. Seraiti, June 13th. Reishi Analysis Team, are you not done yet? Lieutenant of the 3rd Division Kira Izuru asked in an urgent voice. I'm sorry, sir. The density of the reishi is just too high, that our instruments aren't functioning as well as it should. Reiatsu identified, confirmed as a 93% match with our existing Reiatsu samples. It's a Quincy. I see him. Attack. Izuru ordered, only to be struck down with a Hylig file fired from the reishi pillar. Lieutenant Kira, a sneak attack, how disgraceful. Release your Shikai everyone, make him pay for this atrocious move. Disgraceful, you say? I find it rather funny, hearing such words from the Shinigami. You would do well to know, that this is war. And in war, you don't play fair. We had to learn it the hard way. The cloaked figure muttered, the lifeless bodies of the 3rd Division's seated officers falling to the ground behind him. The Quincy noticed that the lieutenant who he had initially thought to be defeated was still alive and breathing, even with the rather large hole he had under his ribs. The wound had been treated hastily in the short amount of time, the lieutenant's efficiency surprising him greatly. "Raise your head, Wabisuke. You'll pay for what you just did to them." Izuru glared at the Quincy coldly, which his opponent responded in an unfazed manner. "Such bold words, but can you back them up? I admit that I didn't expect you to be able to react to my Heilig file, which is a somewhat impressive feat for a mere lieutenant. I suppose I could spare a little time for you before seeking out a more worthy opponent. I live by the belief that those who live together should stay together even after death, so I'll be letting you join your subordinates shortly, Lieutenant Kira Izuru." Izuru's eyes widened in shock at the enemy's comment. "Don't be so surprised. We have been preparing for a very long time. There really is almost nothing we don't know of in the Seraiti. I am the Sternritter. I, Kangdu. Prepare for your death, Shinigami." Bambietta ripped through the bodies of the enemies, none of them being capable of matching her sword for even a single blow. 30, 31, 32, she counted as the bodies she had sliced in half fell to the ground, lengthening the trail of the enemy's corpses that lied behind her. It truly had been a long time since she was given the chance to relieve her stress, something her friends and Ichigo only served to increase. The knowing look Liltato gave her all the time was simply infuriating. "No, it's Ichigo who's infuriating. He's fucking dating 3 girls at the same time, and he doesn't have the guts to ask me out." Bambietta thought to herself in rage. Ichigo had quickly warmed his way into her heart, becoming not only her best friend but her first real crush. His body only improved over time with all the intense training, but what really made her crazy was his hair, which had grown to the point where it reached his upper back, something she really appreciated. But she couldn't take out her anger at the girls or Ichigo since she really did care about them, and she was also banned from killing a random soldat to blow off some steam. Bambietta had been waiting for the moment of war to come greatly, and she intended to make the best of it. Of course, her orders were to take on a captain-level opponent at the earliest chance and steal their Bankai. But she didn't want to waste her time trying to find a captain, so she came to a simple conclusion. If she killed off anyone in her sight, she would eventually come across a captain. Her simple thoughts were proven to be true soon enough as a large man with a wolf-like head instead of a human's grabbed her arm to stop her from slaughtering more of the lesser Shinigami. Even such a young girl is among the enemy's forces. Komamura growled, only to be rebutted with Bambietta's snarky comment. "I didn't know that the Soul Society gave stray doggies the position of a captain. Are you guys really that short on manpower?" Komamura merely growled in response, and raised his Zanpakuto. "Many, do you think that guy is the one who I think he is?" Candice asked, impaling another Shinigami with her Heilig file. "I think so, and he's coming to us." Menina's replied with a small frown, firing her own Heilig file. "Well, we are just that attractive. Too bad for him that we're taken." Candice giggled. "Bitches, you do know that he's Ichigo's to finish off, right?" Liltato said while sucking on a candy bar. The other girls could never understand how she pronounced all her words clearly while doing so, which was one of the many mysteries of the Sternritter. "Well, as far as I know, Ichigo didn't forgive him, but he isn't hell-bent on getting revenge on him either," Menina said, putting her Quincy cross back into her pocket. Abarai Renji frowned as he blocked Menina's Heilig file, feeling the strength behind it. The invaders were killing off their soldiers mercilessly, and he needed to put a stop to it as expected from a lieutenant of the Gote 13. "The hell are you talking about? Well, I suppose 3-on-1 would be a good enough workout." "Roar, Zabumaru." Renji released his Zanpakuto with a confident smirk on his face, earning a disdainful look from the girls. "I'm sure he won't mind as long as that bastard is still breathing when we're done with him. I'll just have to put him in his place," Candice said as sparks flied around her, causing the other girls to step back a little. Renji frowned as he noticed that 2 of the opponents seemed pissed at him for whatever reason. "Now what did I do wrong? It's not like I was staring at their body no matter how tempting." "You're gonna fight me alone?" Renji asked, surprised that the enemy didn't instantly gang up on him. "Obviously, you don't look all that strong, in case you're wondering why." You're also obviously overcompensating the lack of your length with your Zanpakuto too. Candice taunted with a smirk, earning an indignant cry from Renji. I'm not overcompensating anything. Go, Zabumaru. Candice merely grinned as the Renji's Zanpakuto stretched out to her, not feeling threatened at all. Candice caught the Zanpakuto with her bare hand with ease, causing Renji to become alarmed at his enemy's strength instantly. I suppose this is what I should expect from a lieutenant, nowhere near a real captain's level 1C. I'm Sternritter. Candice Catnip, the Thunderbolt. Sorry to say, that I won't be the one to kill you. But I'm gonna beat you up, badly. Renji screamed in agony as Candice released a torrent of electricity, which he couldn't avoid due to his Zanpakuto being held firmly in the girl's hand. I think I'm just gonna watch them fight. There's no point at killing all those men, since it's not like they can really harm us. Menina's muttered while playing with a lock of her hair. You have a point, Liltato agreed, and sat down against a wall. You know, you've been a bit too lax in your training if he blocked your Heilig file without even using his Shikai. I had better things to do with my time. Menina's replied with a small blush adorning her cheeks, which was answered with Liltato's foul words as usual. You're supposed to love me. Why? Pepe whined indignantly with his dying breath. He had thought that it was a good idea to seek out the so-called strongest captain of the Gote 13, Zaraki Kenpachi, to make him his slave of love. Only to be proven wrong with his own body being split in half at Kenpachi's Zanpakuto. He had been so sure that his shrift had worked properly on the man, that he didn't even have the chance to use his Quincy, Vollständig. The only thing I love is fighting, you moron. Kenpachi replied in annoyance. If so, then I shall give you a fight which will be your last. A man with an eye on his forehead said as he leisurely walked towards Kenpachi. Kenpachi blinked in surprise at the shifting form of the man, which started to resemble someone he knew very well. Himself. Oh, now this is gonna be interesting to fight against. Kenpachi shouted in glee at the sight of Lloyd who had changed into a carbon copy of himself. I am Sternritter. Why, the yourself, Lloyd. Let's see how well you fight against yourself, Zaraki Kenpachi. Yoruichi swiftly arrived at her division, only to be greeted by an enemy who had been waiting for her in the shadows. Who's there? Sui-Feng, you're alive, Yoruichi asked, and her voice cracked while doing so. Shaolin couldn't help but smile at the thought of Yoruichi worrying about her, which made her feel bad for what she was about to do. Only a little. It has been quite some time since we've last seen each other, Lady Yoruichi. The captain's Houri fits you much better than myself, even if it was forced on you. Oh, and I go by the name Shaolin now since I'm not the head of the Feng clan anymore. Yoruichi blinked in surprise at the change in Sui-Feng, no, Shaolin's demeanor. Apparently she became a lot more relaxed over the year of her disappearance, even when she was talking with her, Lady Yoruichi, who Shaolin basically worshipped the very ground she walked on. I see, but what's with the clothes you're wearing? Did you become a part of the Quincy King's forces, Shaolin? Don't tell me that the Quincy brainwashed you. I did not join the Quincy, Lady Yoruichi. I still am technically Kurosaki Ichigo's captive, after all. Not that I am treated as such. Shaolin thought the last part to herself. She was treated more like a guest, or a friend to the Sternritter girls. It was so much better compared to just how much she had to stress herself out while trying to train her troops, and keeping her lieutenant in check. Yoruichi's eyes narrowed at the mention of her more recent pupil, her suspicions having been confirmed. So it really was Ichigo who faked their death and took Shaolin with him, to the Quincy King. But why? Why is Ichigo doing all this? And for the brainwashing part, I could say that your guess isn't that far off from the truth, Lady Yoruichi. The only thing that happened to my mind, was the removal of my loyalty to the Gote 13. Yoruichi gasped at the piece of information, while Shaolin continued on. But I'm somewhat thankful that it happened. I've never thought that a day like this would come, but the Gote 13 and the nobles, the Central 46. It's all disgusting to me. I didn't know that my loyalty blinded me that much, but I possessed the knowledge of the deepest secrets of the Gote 13 as the commander-in-chief of the Onmitsukido. You knew most of it as well, and wasn't that a part of the reason you and that man decided to leave the Soul Society oblivious to the upcoming threat of the Quincy? I know that he would have been able to figure out what had been happening, or at least the gist of it. Yoruichi flinched at the accusation, but chose not to refute. Of course she knew the darkest secrets the Gote 13 had been keeping, a burden that comes with the position of the Onmitsukido's head. She herself wasn't all that loyal to the Soul Society anymore, with the 100 years of exile and the recent reinstatement, as a captain serving as a big factor. Kazuki most certainly wasn't one to place something like loyalty, of all things, above his interest, proven by his creation of the Hogyoku. He had his morals without a doubt, but he was a cold and calculative man when he needed to be. Did you know that there was a piece of information which was revealed shortly after Aizen's imprisonment? Ordered to be never spoke again by the Central 46. I'm quite certain that you or the other reinstated captains have never heard of this, Lady Yoruichi. Yoruichi's eyebrows arched in confusion, not at all understanding where Shaolin was going with this. The very reason that made Kurosaki Ichigo an active participant of this invasion. The truth of his mother's death, and the event that happened to her after her soul was purified. Shaolin muttered with disdain evident in her voice, causing her former master to bite her lower lips. What exactly happened to her? Kuchiki Rukia rushed towards the closest pillar of reishi from her location, and noticed the lower-class Shinigami sprawled all over the place. Most of them were still breathing, albeit barely to her relief. The count of death was surprisingly low, barely reaching double digits. Rukia's head snapped up as she raised her Zanpakuto to block an arrow, and nearly dropped her sword upon contact. The power behind this arrow. It's unbelievable. Well blocked, Lieutenant Kuchiki. I expected no less from you. I thought my emerging point was supposed to be near the SRDI, but since I met you out of all people I must be near the 13th Division barracks then. I wonder where Gigi is though. Ichigo. Rukia gasped at the sight of her friend, dressed in a white uniform. He wore a white cloak on himself, which concealed the upper left part of his face with the hood. There was a black pattern etched on that specific part resembling his hollow mask. She also noticed that his hair had grown noticeably longer, about the same length of her adoptive brother. He held a blue bow which was formed out of reishi, a clear evidence that he was the person who fired an arrow at her. It's been a long time since we parted our ways, right? It just so happens that we find ourselves on the opposing sides of a war now. Ichigo muttered, a melancholic look on his face as he had to face one of his friends in battle. The very one he had been dreading to face against. Kuchiki Rukia was the one who connected him to the afterlife, the one he had shared a special bond with. It pained him greatly that this was something inevitable, when he knew that Rukia would never turn her back on someone's trust. He couldn't help but be tempted to mess with her memory like he had done so a year ago to Shaolin, but he couldn't do that to his friend. Who was probably his best friend. He doubted that he could bring himself to mess with even Shaolin's memories with the friendship they shared now. The kind of power his shrift held was enough to corrupt someone, and Ichigo was determined to never lose himself to it. Why are you doing this, Ichigo? I know that the Soul Society's involvement with the incident a year ago was a complete disgrace, but are you going to stand against us in a war because of that? Ichigo chuckled in response, not that surprised at her obliviousness. He doubted that anyone outside of the captains during that time knew of his reasons, even the newly reinstated captains, former vizards. Rukia, my mother was left to die by a Shinigami just because she was a Quincy, and so was I. I'm not sure if I could have forgiven him if that was all, but I learned something that made feel so vengeful, angry, and it wasn't something I couldn't just let go. I hated almost everything related to the Shinigami with all my being for a few months, that I even thought to never use my Zanpakuto again. I've calmed down a little over time, but that doesn't mean I don't feel obligated to pay back what my mom had to suffer. Ichigo explained his reasons with a cold voice, but Rukia could feel the somber tone under it. She had never known that Ichigo's mother was a Quincy, but if what she had heard from Kazuki years ago was true, it really wasn't surprising to her that something like that happened to Ichigo. The same had happened to Yuryu's grandfather after all. She came to the realization that this wasn't something that she could just bring Ichigo back to his senses. He was fighting for his own reasons, and so was she. Just what did your mom suffer, Ichigo? Rukia asked in a soft voice, even if she knew that they were merely delaying the inevitable with small talk. She could see that Ichigo really didn't want to fight her seriously, a shared sentiment on her part. Ichigo pondered about whether he should tell her right now or not, and suddenly adopted a small grin on his face. You know what? I'll tell you after we have a little match between us. I want to see if you improved over the time we hadn't seen each other, and you'll never be able to show me your best if I tell you right now. The longer you hold me back, the less of your subordinates will find themselves at the receiving end of my bow. If you win, I'll even step back in this invasion. Ichigo formed a sword out of reishi as he spoke, which Rukia recognized as Ichigo's bankai. It's not the real Zangetsu, mind you. It's a mere imitation, so I'm not using my bankai in case you're wondering. Your call, Rukia. Are you just going to let the enemy go on his way to wreak havoc? I've killed some of your subordinates, no matter how many I tried to spare. Surely you can't let it abide as a lieutenant of the Gote 13. Dance, Sota no Shirayuki. Rukia immediately released her shikai with a look of determination on her face. If the power she felt from Ichigo's reishi arrow was any proof, she needed to do her absolute best if she wanted a chance of victory. I hope you didn't get all rusty during the years, Ichigo. It'll be a boring match if you did. Ichigo raised his brows, and let out a laugh. Oh, Rukia, you have absolutely no idea how I spent my past year. The only thing I could do other than spending some time with my girlfriends was training my ass off. You'll be surprised at just how much I improved. Oh, girlfriends, as in plural Ichigo. I can clearly see that you did improve from the prudish strawberry I remember. Rukia said with a sly grin, which didn't bring out the response she had been expecting. Rukia, are you sure this is a good time for you to tease me? Countless men are dying all over the Seraiti, and you'll have to put me down if you want to save them. If you fail, I can't afford to be lenient with your subordinates anymore. Besides, I'm used to pet names at this point, so that I couldn't care less about your strawberry jabs. Ichigo replied with a smirk, and then it disappeared as soon as he brought up his sword. I am the Sternritter, Kurosaki Ichigo. Show me your best, Lieutenant Kuchiki. Rukia raised her hand and concentrated her Raryoku, refusing to answer as she realized that Ichigo was right. She needed to put a stop to him and the enemies, a duty that fell into her hands not only as a lieutenant but a member of the Gote 13. As much as it pained her to fight against her friend in a real war. Hado number 73, Soren Sokatsui. She would do her very best to ensure that he doesn't cause any more harm to the Soul Society. Hinamori, this is my official order as your captain, so listen carefully. Take all of our men with ya, to the 4th Division barracks, far away from me. I'm afraid I won't be able to hold back against them. Shinji muttered as he was faced with 3 of the enemy. Momo seemed to be conflicted on whether to follow her given orders or protest against it, but soon nodded her head and went on her way to collect the 5th Division members. Oh, you think you're so tough, that you can take on all of us? Aren't you an arrogant one? Sternritter. Hugh, Berenice Gabrielli questioned with a snicker. How laughable. We will show you your place, Captain. Sternritter. R. Jerome Guizbad boomed, causing Shinji and Berenice to wince at his loud voice. 5th Division Captain, Hiroko Shinji. Your arrogance will be your undoing. I can only hope that you will be able to provide some valuable data before you die. Sternritter. K. BG9 stated with a cold voice, which lacked any kind of emotion. Shinji released his shikai without a word, a look of concern on his face as he sensed a few of his subordinates still within range. He hoped that Momo would finish her task soon enough. He would have to stall a little more time until then. Say, what's with all your letters? Does it hold a meaning, like the rank of your strength? Shinji asked, thinking of the espada. Why should we even answer your question? It's my job to ask questions, not yours. Besides, you're obviously stalling time for your lieutenant to vacate the area for whatever reason you have. Berenice replied, only to adopt a look of annoyance a second later as BG9 answered Shinji's question. The letters represent the power we have at our disposal, our shrifts bestowed by His Majesty. Mine is, the knowledge, Berenice's is, the question, Jerome's is, the roar. What the hell, you scrap metal? Why are you explaining that to the enemy? You're fucking malfunctioning. It doesn't matter, Berenice. He's gonna die in a few minutes anyway. Jerome roared, and Shinji realized that whatever power, the roar, was, it had something to do with that freaking loud voice. Yes, it is irrelevant. There is no problem in satisfying a man's thirst for knowledge if he is to die at our hands soon. BG9 added his own piece. Berenice merely ignored the robot, and turned her attention to Shinji, who was deep in thought about something that had been bothering him for a long time. You know what, I think I'm going to have a hell lot of fun questioning you. Is there someone among your ranks who can erase other people's memory? Shinji asked, causing the female Sternritter to blink at him in confusion. Yes, our Sternritter. Who? BG9 was silenced as Berenice whacked its head with a hastily formed reishi construct, which didn't even have a proper shape. You fucking robot, stop dishing out the information about our forces to the enemy. If you try to say something like that, I'll just dispose of you with my own hands. My senses are malfunctioning, BG9 replied with an incoherent answer. What the hell are you? What the fuck? Berenice muttered, realizing that something was indeed wrong. Shinji sighed in relief as he finally sensed no one other than the three enemies in the vicinity. My Zanpakuto, Sakanade is a nasty one, see. It reverses the direction of everything in your sight. And it ain't something you can get used to easily. Oh, I can even make hear my words backwards too. Anyway, I'm good at doing everything in reverse. Apparently, I'm better at fighting when I'm outnumbered too. I know that you guys have some sort of way to seal or neutralize my Bankai, but I can assure all are gonna be a bit too busy to deal with my Bankai. Bankai, Sakashima Yokoshima Happo Fusagari. Shinji smirked as a flower-like pedestal formed at his feet, which soon surrounded him protectively. Berenice quickly reached for her medallion, only to find herself forming a Hylic Bogan without even realizing. She felt a strange compulsion, the urge to strike down her fellow Sternritter. Fellow Sternritter, no, they are your enemy. At the same time, Jerome roared at BG9, who merely changed his arm into a machine gun-like weapon and shot him in retaliation. Berenice joined in the fight with her arrows, determined to eliminate them both. Pity we got banned from using your Bankai, Sakanade. We might as well just leave the Gote 13 as an exile again after this, if they decide to piss us off for using it without permission. Hiyori must have been crying herself to sleep since we left, wouldn't ya, agree? Shinji asked his Zanpakuto, not receiving a response. No, if the one who messed with my memories when Captain Sui-Feng died is one of them, I could have stopped it from happening if I just kept my guard up. Oh, you're saying it wasn't my fault. Now what do ya really know, Sakanade? Shinji stopped his muttering as he suddenly felt a familiar Reiatsu spiking up from the direction of the 2nd Division. Okay, now I'm confused. Can you please tell me what ya know, Sakanade? Chapter 8. The Downfall. Muken. June 13th. Have you come to recruit me, the King of Quincy? A voice could be heard from a man, who actually had his entire body bound with restraints, including even his mouth. Indeed I have, although it is the Emperor now. It rather amazes me that you are able to speak even with all those restraints, Aizen Sosuke. To think of it, your punishment is quite harsh for the Gote 13 of today. They have mellowed out to the degree that I can no longer recognize it as the same group that crushed my empire back then. Yhwach answered. Apparently my sentence was raised to 20,000 years for talking back to the judge during my sentencing. I told them that it is comical for them to judge someone of my caliber, which brought out such result. Just another proof that their so-called power was built on a fragile sandcastle. Yhwach found it rather hard for him to read the immortal's expression when the said man's face was bound with restraints, but he didn't overly concern himself with it. This visit was merely for a show, after all. While he knew that the man in front of him's mind was one of the greatest the Soul Society had ever seen, even he could not see through their true intentions. I must agree with you on that subject, although I'm afraid that we should return to the more important matters, seeing that I'm working on a tight schedule. I shall offer you your freedom in exchange for your services under my banner. Yhwach offered, although he had known what kind of answer he would receive long before entering this prison. While I am honored to receive such an offer, I'm afraid I'll have to decline. I am a man who thrives to stand upon the heavens, and it is something that could not be achieved if I am serving under another. I also happen to be expecting my release in a few days' time at most. Aizen answered with a small laugh. Yes, you did say that you shall stand upon the heavens while revealing your true nature. Or is it just another false mask? I suppose it is something that no one could come up with an answer to that, including even yourself. Yhwach chuckled, while Aizen agreed wholeheartedly with the Emperor. He actually had absolutely no idea about his true nature, but such was a burden he had to carry as the wielder of Kyoka Suigetsu. But what makes you think I will leave you be, when I know that you'll prove to be a threat to my plans, Aizen Sosuke? Yhwach asked out of curiosity. Aizen laughed at hearing such words, which lasted for quite some time before he calmed down enough to answer the Emperor's question. I just know that you will. Aizen was interrupted by a sudden spike of Reiatsu, which could only belong to the head captain, Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni. It seems that one of your men has brought upon the head captain's ire on himself. Should I offer my condolences? Aizen asked dryly, in which Yhwach merely laughed as a response. It is of no concern. I expected such an event the moment Bersi stole the 1st Division Lieutenant's Bankai. I suppose I should take my leave to pay my dear friend Yamamoto a visit. It was quite the entertaining conversation we had, even if you declined my offer. We shall meet again in due time, Aizen Sosuke. Yhwach turned away from the prisoner, only to be stopped by his words. Before you leave, I must congratulate you on the success of recruiting Kurosaki Ichigo to your cause. If you wouldn't mind answering, do you think he will stand firmly on your side until the end? Maybe he will, maybe he will not. But I have my ways to keep my children from stepping out of line. Yhwach replied with a chuckle, and disappeared into the shadows of Mukan. Aizen couldn't help but feel something off from Yhwach, but he wasn't able to make out the reason. But he pushed the thought into the corner of his head. It wouldn't matter, since he would be the one to laugh in the end. Even if the way Kurosaki Ichigo had strayed off his path did bother him to some degree, he wasn't overly worried about it. I wonder who will come to release me when they become desperate. One of Yamamoto's pupils, I suppose. Aizen thought to himself as the darkness claimed the prison once more. Bazz frowned as a swarm of petal-like sword fragments intercepted his Heilig files that were about to pierce one of the Shinigami officers, and changed its direction towards him. It wouldn't have been enough to stop the Heilig files if he had put some more effort into the forming of those, but he wasn't about to waste his strength on some low-ranked Shinigami who were seated officer at most. He raised his hand and swiped it against the storm of petals, trails of flames following the tip of his fingers. Shit, he muttered as he felt some of the petals cut through his blood vein, even if he had succeeded in throwing off the blades. He grudgingly admitted that he needed to adjust his blood. It seems that he was maybe underestimating the captains of the current times. So, you've come to stop me. I wouldn't have minded killing off some more of your subordinates, but I suppose I would like someone more challenging. You think you'd be enough to take on my heat, Captain? Bazz asked, causing Byakuya to arch his eyebrows. Kuchiki Byakuya wasn't all that sure about how the enemy was wielding flames, since he did not know that much about the Quincy. The only contact he had with one was Ishida Ryu, who had no such powers. Byakuya pushed the thought away, and focused on the enemy. I do not know of the reasons behind your invasion, Quincy. But it is my duty as a captain of the Gote 13 to protect the Seraiti from intruders such as you. This is where you will meet your end. You don't know of the reasons. Is that so, the head of the Kuchiki clan? 'Cause you out of all people should know why. Bazz scoffed, and added a moment later. And you seem to be under the impression that you're going to win, but it ain't happening. Byakuya didn't bother replying, and controlled his Zanpakuto Senbon Sakura. As 1,000 deadly petals swarmed the Quincy, he merely smirked and stomped the ground with his feet. Flames erupted from the ground around Bazz and engulfed the petals. A second later, Byakuya disappeared from his place with Shunpo, barely avoiding Bazz Heilig files from above. You that eager to fight me, pretty boy? That's fine with me. I'm gonna burn you alive, with the heat. Bazz said as he landed with a grin on his face, which widened a second later when he felt the spike of a familiar Reiatsu not that far from their current position. Oh, Miss Sparky just fried someone. What a hellcat, that girl. Byakuya also noticed that it was his lieutenant who had engaged the enemy, and frowned. He wasn't all that sure if his lieutenant would emerge victorious against his enemy, considering the fact that while Renji was fighting only one opponent at the moment, there were 2 more enemies in that area. He would have to deal with his opponent quickly. Oh, is something troubling you? Maybe the one Candice is frying to death is one of your subordinates. I feel bad to tell you this, but when that guy chose to challenge Candice, his fate was sealed. Whether he wins against her or not, is irrelevant. That guy's gonna die at her hand, or her lover's hand. Baz B said with a smirk. He knew that the guy would end up dead if he hurt the Sternritter, in any way, or any of his other girls for that matter. Lucky bastard, he thought to himself. All the more reason for me to put you down as soon as I can, and lend a hand to my lieutenant. I shall show no mercy towards your kind, who are responsible for the death of Lieutenant Sasaki. The cowards who spilled blood within the walls of the Zaraki without any warning. Byakuya stated coldly, only to be interrupted by Baz B's furious reply. Cowards. Did you just fucking say, cowards? Look who's talking, the captain of the Gote 13. A member of the accursed organization who slaughtered thousands of innocents and children in a cowardly attack 1,000 years ago. Your kind has no right to accuse us as such. Ugh, why'd I even bother? I'm just gonna kill you, and be done with it. Burner Finger 1. Byakuya quickly gathered the petals of Senbon Sakura in front of him, only to be surprised at the stinging pain from his stomach. He realized that the attack had penetrated his body, and scorched the flesh around the area. Byakuya disappeared with a step of Shunpo to avoid another beam of the heat or flame, or whatever the attack was. He realized that if Renji's opponent was anywhere near the level of his own opponent, he would need to deal with his opponent as soon as possible. But the problem was, the enemy could effectively neutralize their Bankai. What's the matter, Captain? I'm not even trying yet. Burner Finger 2. Bakudo number 81, Danku. Byakuya grimaced as he saw that his Kido had been taken down with a single blast. Even if he had been successful in blocking the enemy's attack, Denku was a Kido at the level of 80s, which was something he couldn't throw around infinitely. Hado number 33, Sokatsui. Now that's more like it. Let's heat the game up a notch. Burner Finger 2. Baz B yelled as Byakuya's Kido and his flames met, resulting in an explosion that covered the whole area. Byakuya didn't miss the chance, and appeared behind Baz B with a step of Shunpo. Hado number 4, Byakurai. Now, that wasn't very nice of you. Your actions don't go well with your words, really. Baz B said nonchalantly as a white bolt of lightning flashed to the sky, Byakuya's hand caught in his grip. I'll be blunt, you're no match for me without your Bankai, and you're afraid of using it because you know that it won't work. What can you do, but face your death like a man? Bakudo number 61, Raikujokuro. Baz B's eyes widened in surprise, as 6 beams of light slammed into his upper body. Byakuya was standing at a distance, somehow having been escaped his grasp. Now, how did you escape that? Why are you under the impression that I'll explain anything to you? Byakuya replied, and directed Senbon Sakura towards the bound form of the Quincy. He turned away from his enemy as the 1,000 petals of Senbon Sakura ripped the Quincy apart, only to look back in surprise as he heard the laughter of the enemy. Byakuya frowned when he noticed that while the enemy's cloak was indeed ripped to shreds, the enemy had no visual wounds on his body. You can't wound me, Kuchiki Byakuya. Not with your feeble flower petals. Baz B taunted as he laughed, although he knew that his blood wouldn't last against the Zanpakuto forever. Well, he didn't plan on staying still until his blood shattered anyway. My heat, on the other hand, is more than capable of doing so. Burner Finger 4. Byakuya avoided a clean hit with the flaming knife that formed on the enemy's hand, being barely able to react in time with his Shunpo to Baz B's Flugbildskrit. He quickly fired a Byakurai, only for it to easily avoided with a small movement on Baz B's part. Baz B pressed his opponent to a match of speed with his Flugbildskrit, not that surprised that the captain was more than capable of keeping up with his speed. He wondered if he could defeat his opponent without using his Vollständig, considering how he seemed to be against using his Bankai. He was fine either way, since his objective was to kill his enemy. The Emperor's orders were to steal their Bankai, but if they didn't use it, then there wouldn't be a problem for him to just kill them and be done with it. Byakuya was conflicted with whether to use his Bankai and crush the Quincy with all his might, or remain in this stalemate while the Gote 13 was fighting a losing battle. His lieutenant was facing an opponent clearly above his level with two more of them observing the situation, while he himself was having trouble with dealing the enemy without the use of his Bankai. But would it be wise of him to expose his Bankai to whatever the enemy's method of dealing with it is? Byakuya contemplated the situation and came to the simple conclusion. I have no choice. It would never be the best of the moves, but he could sense his lieutenant's strength dwindling even at the moment. Hundreds of men were dying all over the Zaraki, and he was stuck with his opponent who was on a level that required his Bankai if he were to secure victory. Byakuya hastily put some distance between him and the enemy, the petals of Senbon Sakura retracting to its hilt. I would have preferred to do this while someone was at my side to aid me, in case my Bankai is indeed sealed. I will admit that you are an opponent I cannot defeat easily without the use of my Bankai. So I shall simply crush you with all of its might before you're given the chance to seal it. Bankai, Senbon Sakura Kujoshi, Byakuya said as he dropped his sword into the ground. Bazz couldn't help but grin as 2 rows of giant blades rose from the sidelines of the captain, and fished out his medallion from the insides of his trench coat. Byakuya's eyes widened as the blades that were about to scatter were dissolved and absorbed into the medallion held in Bazz hand. What? This is no seal, Byakuya muttered as the realization dawned on him. He had made a grave mistake, something that would cost him greatly. You got that right, Captain. I didn't seal your Bankai. No, I stole it. And I wonder how it would feel like for you to meet your demise with your own Bankai. Bazz replied to the captain with a smirk, as he repeatedly threw his medallion up into the air and caught it. Bankai, Senbon Sakura Kujoshi. Kuchiki Byakuya grimaced as 1,000 blades rose from the ground across him, for the first time in his life. Abarai Renji let out a growl as another streak of lightning almost hit him, knowing that it didn't miss him because he dodged well. No, his opponent was playing with him for whatever sadistic reason. As I said, you don't look all that strong. And you obviously aren't, Candice taunted as she flicked a few strands of hair over her shoulders. She was having quite the fun with the lieutenant in front of her, the bastard who caused so much grief to her lover. It truly was a pity that she couldn't kill him, which probably was a shared sentiment with the other girls. Shut up, if only I could use my Bankai. Renji gritted his teeth in annoyance. He was having a hard time reminding himself that he shouldn't use his Bankai, lest it gets sealed. Granted, there was no guarantee that he could defeat the enemy Quincy and the other 2 spectators if he used his Bankai, but he knew that he was fighting a losing battle without it. You're talking as if someone's stopping you from using it. I'm obviously not, Candice said with a frown. I'm not stupid, you bitch. Did you think I'd fall for that and use my Bankai for you to seal it? Renji shouted, only for Candice to burst out in a fit of laughter. She was having a hard time breathing with all the laughing, finding the enemy's words to be extremely amusing. You've got 2 things wrong, you moron. First off, I'm not going to seal your Bankai. It'd be a waste of my medallion if I were to use it on a weakling like you. And secondly, our medallion steals your Bankai, not seal it. And it looks like some of your captains lost their Bankai, too. It was exactly that moment when the voice of Matsumoto Rangaku ran through Renji's head, which could only be her Bakudo number 77, Tentikura. This is the lieutenant of the 10th Division speaking. All captains are not to use Bankai under no circumstances. The enemy has the means to steal our Bankai. I repeat, do not use your Bankai. Renji froze upon hearing the news, which only confirmed the Sternritter's words. They could steal their Bankai. The thought was ridiculous, but scary at the same time. Did you receive some bad news? As I said, feel free to use your Bankai. Our orders are to steal the captain's Bankai, which doesn't include a mere lieutenant like you. If you choose not to, fine by me. I'm going to fry you anyway, Candice stated, sparks running all over her body. She was glad that it didn't affect her hair, since it would have been a drag to maintain her hair if that was the case. Fine, you asked for it. Bankai, Hahio Zabameru. Candice didn't even bat an eye upon seeing the giant snake-like Bankai, obviously not that impressed by it. She most certainly wasn't stealing a Bankai like that. She'd rather use her Vollständig, rather than be unable to use it while wielding a bankai that was so ungraceful. There was also the fact that she had spent quite some time on mastering her Vollständig with the help of Ichigo, something he was more than happy to partake in. It would be an insult to his help if she were to give up the use of her Vollständig for a bankai that was way under her standards. That baboon is a fucking moron. If his bankai was any more useful to us than that, he would have given up his bankai on a silver platter. Liltato muttered as she threw away the stick of her already eaten candy, and pulled out another one from her pocket. It's ugly. I doubt that it's something worth to steal, and become unable to use our Vollständig. Oh, he's in so much trouble. Menina sighed as she saw the lieutenant actually landing a hit on Candice with a massive Raryoku, knowing that Candice would be pissed at the outcome. I pity him. No, I actually don't. That bastard, Liltato said, as she reminded herself that the Shinigami she was talking about was someone who actually left a Quincy to die just because she was a Quincy. That was more than enough reason for her to hate him. Candice frowned as she was engulfed with the Raryoku launched by her enemy's bankai. She could have evaded it with her Flugbildscrit easily, but apparently her current position was lined up with the other girls. While she knew that they wouldn't be harmed in the slightest by this attack, considering the fact that they were stronger than herself. Well, maybe not anymore. Candice was well aware that she had gotten a lot stronger due to Ichigo's help, so she probably wasn't that far off from her friends. Regardless, she claimed this fight for herself, and she wasn't about to let a stray attack bother the girls. She knew that they would never let her hear the end of it if she did. So she tried to crush the mass of Reiatsu with her hand, not expecting it to explode immediately on contact. Hey, how's that you bitch? Renji shouted with a smug look, which dropped instantly as the cloud of smoke cleared from the burst of Reiatsu of his enemy. Candice wasn't harmed from the attack, not even in the slightest, much to Renji's horror. Hakatsu Teiho was the strongest attack he could manage in his bankai, and if that was ineffective against the Quincy. You, Candice growled as she touched the tip of her hair, which was apparently a little singed from Renji's attack. Her hand immediately moved to the one that had her Leitenhand on it, intent on crushing the red-haired Shinigami with all her might. You fucking ruined my hair. I'm gonna kill you. Renji frowned as the girl threatened to kill him for ruining her hair, something he really didn't see what the big deal was. What he actually cared about was the fact that the enemy was pissed at him. He blinked as some kind of wings that looked like thunderbolts appeared behind her. I didn't really like the idea of stealing your bankai in the first place. Why would we need to do that, when our Vollständig stands far above it? Candice said as she grabbed two of her wings in her hand. She was fucking pissed. No one, and absolutely no one except Ichigo can mess with her hair and live to see another day. She pulled her right arm, and flung one of the thunderbolts at her enemy. Galvano Javelin, Hakatsu Teiho, Renji yelled, only to gasp as the thunderbolt ripped his attack apart and blasted his Hahio Zabumaru to pieces. Suddenly, the green-haired Quincy appeared in front of him and slammed her fist into his face. Renji flew backwards and slammed into a wall, only for the wall to collapse immediately. Renji groaned as he felt the enemy plant her foot on his chest. Candice grabbed the tail of Renji's hair and pulled his head up, and almost growled out the words. I fucking hate you, Shinigami. And it's not due to the fact that you're my enemy. I hate you for causing so much grief to Ichigo's life. What do you mean? How the hell do you even know Ichigo? What do you mean I caused grief to his life? Renji asked in disbelief and confusion. Just how did he wrong Ichigo? Candice scoffed at the red-haired lieutenant and sent a jolt of electricity at him, displeased at the fact that the offender was oblivious to his own sin. Renji groaned as the pain sent him to the brink of his consciousness. Since I'm not gonna kill you, I might as well tell you. 9 years ago, you left a Quincy woman to die at the hands of a hollow. Renji's eyebrows rose as he remembered that day. Of course, and it's a good thing I did, seeing how you Quincy attacked us without warning. The woman you so graciously allowed to die, her name was Kurosaki Masaki. You are the one who killed Ichigo's mother. Do you get it now, you bastard? Candice said with a sneer, causing the Shinigami to become silent. Candice knew that if it wasn't for him, Ichigo probably wouldn't be fighting on their side. She would have been fighting against her beloved in this war if everything hadn't happened the way it did. But it didn't mean she liked the fact that Ichigo had to go through such experience at that age. It probably was hypocritical of her to be mad at the Shinigami, but she didn't care really. Renji didn't know what to say at the moment. The Quincy he left to die at the hands of a hollow was Ichigo's mother. Then the child with her at the time. It was then he realized that the child in his memory actually had bright orange hair. Ichigo was the one who had rescued Rukia from execution. Ichigo was someone he acknowledged as a friend, even a rival. And he was the one who practically killed Ichigo's mother. And Ichigo is a Quincy, one of them now. I can't let my guilt cloud my judgment when hundreds of Shinigami are dying. I would have committed seppuku in front of Ichigo for that if I had known this earlier, but I can't do that now. Not when we're in the midst of war. Renji thought to himself. Unfortunately for Renji, Candice had noticed him stealing his resolve. She was still very much pissed at him for ruining her hair, but she wasn't going to kill him no matter what. Even if Ichigo probably wouldn't care that much if one of the girls killed him in his stead, she was going to keep him alive until Ichigo tells her otherwise. The choice regarding the Shinigami was Ichigo's, and only his. Renji attempted to escape his current position, only to fall unconscious a moment later. Candice rolled her eyes at the obviousness of his intentions. Even a child would have caught on his attempt on escaping. She picked him up and appeared in front of the other girls, getting out of her Vollständig state as soon as she landed. Candice rolled her eyes at the sight of her friends leaning against each other leisurely. Your Vollständig was an overkill. I thought you were going to kill him. Menina's commented. I know. I wouldn't have used it if the bastard didn't ruin my hair. And my hair wouldn't have been ruined if I just let his attack hit you too. Candice said in a tone, which Menina's recognized as her pout. And don't say it, Lil. I know that it could never scratch you. Liltato opened her mouth to respond with a foul word, but closed it without saying a word a second later. She shrugged and returned her attention to her candy. Well, I'm surprised that you showed that much restraint to someone who messed with your hair. I doubt that you would let even Ichigo go if he singed it. I'm not sure how I would feel about it if he actually did that to me, but it's something that would never happen. Ichigo knows how much effort I put in my hair, and respects it too much. Candice replied with a shrug, although she couldn't help but feel a flutter in her stomach when she thought of it. Menina's nodded in agreement to both notions, and frowned as she set her sight on the unconscious form of the lieutenant. I'm not really sure if we should let Ichigo deal with him. I mean, he could. Whether Ichigo forgives him or not, it's supposed to be his choice, I'm not gonna assume what's best for him and just kill that bastard with my own hands. You know how important this is for him. Candice nearly growled out the words, which caused Menina's to flinch. Candice sent an apologetic look for her harsh tone when she noticed the flinch. You're right, but I can't help but be worried about him. He's supposed to be a close friend to that Kuchiki girl, you know. Menina said with a small frown. If she chooses one friend over another even if the said friend wronged the other one, she doesn't deserve to be considered Ichigo's friend. She can choose to side with the Shinigami, that's fine. But I'll kill her if she dares to take his side over Ichigo's. Candice said as she waved at the unconscious form of Renji, emphasizing the word, his, with a look of disdain. What do you think we should do now? Not all of us can fight a captain, since we outnumber them easily. I'd rather not needlessly slaughter every Shinigami I come across. Menina sent a questioning look to Liltato while twirling a strand of pink hair with her finger. Liltato stared at her for a moment, and answered. Don't really care. We can either join Bambi, or Ichigo. She thought to herself for a second, and added. Or just slack off. Candice concentrated on sensing the reiatsu of both her friend and boyfriend, sticking out her tongue out of the corner of her mouth while doing so. Menina stifled a giggle, finding her friend's habit to be funny. Where is Gigi, anyway? I can't really sense her anywhere. And it looks like Bambi's fighting a captain and obviously winning, while Ichigo's playing with someone, probably a lieutenant. Liltato stared at Candice in confusion, while Menina's couldn't hide her surprised expression at hearing that. It didn't go unnoticed to Candice, not that the other girls even bothered to hide anything from her. What? Candice yelled in frustration. Nothing. Liltato replied, only for Candice to growl at her in annoyance. She rolled her eyes, and answered with a huff. Fine, I didn't expect you to be able to sense them. Candice's gaze changed its direction to Menina's, who gave out a nervous chuckle. Same. Well, for your information, I actually trained with Ichigo instead of jumping into his lap in all of my free time. Candice scoffed, causing Menina's to giggle. Jealous much, Candy. Ichigo wouldn't have found it necessary to train you, if you actually spent more time training instead of fussing over your hair before you met him. And you could have had some more fun with him instead of training if you did. Hey, Ichigo is absolutely in love with my hair. He always helps me with it in the morning, in case you haven't noticed. Don't you think he would do the same for us if we asked? Menina's asked with a tilt of her head, resulting in the loss of words for Candice. Well, yeah, but, I hate you. No, you love me. Menina's replied with an innocent expression. Whatever, let's go see Bambi first, since she's closer to us. Candice said with a sigh. Hitsugaya Toshiro shivered as he felt coldness. It was probably the first time he had felt such a sensation ever since he had learned the name of his Zanpakuto. No, actually it was a little different from that. Maybe the enemy's thorns of light he uses to attack possesses some kind of poisonous properties. It seems that you have begun to notice. Perhaps you're thinking that this is the effect of a poison. You're wrong. This sensation, it is something I'm sure you have cast aside long ago. As Not drawled, eliciting a frown from the young captain. Since you became a captain, and build up your strength to overwhelm your enemies. I am sure that you would not have felt this sensation for a long time. Yet, this sensation very well could be the most important thing a person could feel. It is fear. Toshiro froze upon hearing those words, coming to the realization that he was indeed afraid. Even as Rangaku voiced her disagreement on the matter, he knew that it was true. Matsumoto, I am going to use my Bankai. Captain. But the enemy, Rangaku protested, only to be silenced immediately. Yes, I'm aware that they are capable of sealing our Bankai. But that is precisely why I am going to use it when you're with me. Our enemies are not the kind of opponent we can defeat without using our Bankai. We must see how they seal our Bankai, and come up with a way to counter it. When he seals my Bankai, fight with me and aid me in finding a way to break the seal. Toshiro said, ignoring the fear that was trying to hold him back. He was not going to back off from battle just because of some fear, never again. Yes, Captain. Toshiro turned to the Quincy, and shouted. Despite your belief, fear isn't something I'm unfamiliar with. I've simply overcome each and every one of them, that's all. Bankai, Daigure and Hirenmaru. As expression did not change as he brought out his medallion, and activated it. Toshiro's expression, on the other hand, turned into a one of sheer horror. The fear that had been plaguing his mind increased drastically as the wings of ice that formed with his Bankai dissolved into nothingness. What happened, Captain? I can't feel anything. Hirenmaru, answer me, say something. Anything. Hirenmaru, as stared impassively as the young captain desperately called for his Zanpakuto. He knew that it would only take a slight push for the captain to be swallowed in despair. You've said that you overcame all of your fears of the past. You may believe that to be true. But fear that comes from reason is kind. Matsumoto, use the Tente Kura, quickly. We must inform all the other captains of this. Tell them not to use their Bankai, or they will steal it. Toshiro hastily ordered while desperately subduing his fear, which Rangaku followed without hesitation. To his surprise, the enemy remained still until Rangaku had finished informing the other members of the Gote 13 of the situation. Perhaps you are wondering why I let your lieutenant inform the situation to the other Shinigami. It is quite simple, really. The outcome of this war was sealed even before it started, hence I saw no need to interrupt you. Bankai, Daigure and Hirenmaru, this will need some time to get used to it. As said as wings of ice started to form behind his frame. Toshiro bit his lip at the sight of his Bankai responding to the hands of the enemy, the coppery taste filling his mouth. Now, where was I? Ah, yes. Toshiro's eyes widened in shock as the enemy's thorns of light flew at a speed even he had trouble following, and impaled his lieutenant. It wasn't fatal per se. What made him call out her name in fear was the scream she let out, which almost caused him to scream like a frightened child overwhelmed with fear. Matsumoto, as I said, fear that comes from reason is kind. It is something that can be conquered with sheer will, or through experience. But true fear is without reason. It is not an emotion, but an instinct. And you cannot escape from instinct. As spoke, only for Toshiro to let out an incoherent scream and charge at the Sternritter. As caught the captain's blade in one hand with ease, not even budging in his place. He noticed the fearful look in the eyes of his opponent, and commented. Your blade has become dull from the fear. Do not worry, I do not think any less of you for it. After all, how could you hope to defeat your own Bankai with only your Shikai? Toshiro gasped as ice started to form from the spot as had stabbed, restricting his movements. He suddenly realized that he was surrounded with numerous ice pillars, with no way to escape. Senin Hyro, Toshiro muttered. It is a fitting name for such a fearsome technique, indeed. Your Bankai shall prove to be a good enough spoils of war for our first strike. Farewell, Captain Hitsugaya. Matsumoto, Momo, Toshiro thought to himself as he was encased by the ice of his own Bankai. Captain, Rangaku groaned, unable to move due to the fear that was overwhelming her body. As Not barely spared a glance towards the lieutenant before he left without another word. You are pulling punches on me, Rukia stated, glaring daggers at the orange-haired Sternritter. I suppose I am, Ichigo replied without breaking a sweat. Rukia wanted to kick his shin for that cheeky admission, but had to remind herself that this Ichigo was not her best friend she could roughhouse with. Take me seriously, you idiot. Whoever said I'm not taking this seriously? Ichigo answered with a scowl. No offense, but your Kido can't break my blood vene, especially when I'm using it with my Hiero. I know your Zanpakuto's abilities all too well, and you can't land a hit on me with those when I'm way too fast for you to follow. As far as I know, you haven't achieved Bankai yet. I know what you're capable of and what not, so don't accuse me of not taking you seriously. Fine, be that way. Rukia seethed, although she admitted that Ichigo was indeed right on all of his points. Rukia couldn't help but notice the way Ichigo parried each and every single one of her strikes with ease, and even some grace. He wasn't joking when he said that he had spent most of his time on training, considering the noticeable difference of his combat style compared to 3 years ago. She wasn't all that happy to admit it, but Ichigo was actually better at Zanjutsu than herself. Rukia chose to go on the offensive once more and lunged at Ichigo, only for Soda no Shirayuki to fly out of her grip and embed itself into a wooden wall near her. Sorry Rukia, but I'll have to cut this short. Apparently there are things I need to do in this invasion, you see. I really can't slack off any more than I already have, given my position. Ichigo said with a frown marring his face. He could sense that a few of the Sternritter have fallen or was about to fall in battle, while none of the captains have yet to be defeated. He knew that it was only a matter of time, if the Bankai their opponents had stolen from them was any indication. 2 of their own's death was caused by a special war power, so maybe he was needed over there. Well, it wasn't his intention to emerge near the 13th Division barracks in the first place anyway. So you could have ended this whenever you wanted. I'm not sure if I should feel insulted. Rukia muttered as she stared at her empty hands. Her Kido wasn't even capable of leaving a scratch on his skin, and he outmatched her in both skill and power. But then again, she shouldn't be surprised that much, since Ichigo was more than capable of matching captain-level enemies even 3 years ago. Rukia knew that she was nowhere near a captain in both sheer power and skill, yet. But Rukia opened her mouth, only to be interrupted with a voice that rang inside her head. Rukia's eyes widened as she received Rangaku's Tentekura, and turned to Ichigo. He raised his brows when he saw her head snapping towards his direction, although he could easily guess the reason. You can steal our Bankai. Ichigo didn't bother answering that question and shrugged, expecting it to be a rhetorical question. Rukia bit her lips, realizing that her brother was one of the captains who lost their Bankai. Ni-san. I doubt that he'll die today, Ichigo stated, instantly gaining Rukia's attention. He's too stubborn to die just because he lost his Bankai. Byakuya's gonna make it out alive for your sake, Rukia. I won't forgive him if he let you down again. Rukia stared at the scowling face of Ichigo for a moment and let out a sigh. I guess. You said that you'll tell me about your mom. I want to hear the details, Ichigo. Ichigo scratched the back of his head, and frowned his brows as he thought about his mom. He had let go of most of his anger during the past year, but there was one man he could never bring himself to forgive. Just the thought of the bastard made his blood boil with rage. My mom. She was purified when my old man dealt with Grand Fisher. Later on, she was found in one of the lower districts of Rukongai by the 12th Division, or SRDI, or whatever. Do I really need to say more on the matter? Ichigo gritted out the words, loathing the subject with all his being. The only reason he was actually saying it was the fact that he had promised to do so. Oh, I suppose not, Rukia muttered, understanding exactly why Ichigo would side against them. She knew that the Soul Society held a lot of flaws, given her past experiences. She was from the Rukongai, adopted into a noble house later on. Other people's attitude towards her changed drastically because of it. Well, she had been almost executed due to the plot of Aizen after all. All the captains knew what that bastard did to my mother, although they were banned from speaking about that subject by the orders of the Central 46. I don't really hold any bad feelings on them anymore, but I can't forgive that bastard Kuretsuchi no matter what. Hell, I don't really hate Aburaya that much now, and that's saying something. Ichigo said, not realizing that he hadn't spoken about Renji's involvement in his mother's death to Rukia yet. Wait, Aburaya, you mean Renji? What did he do? Rukia asked with a small frown. Ichigo contemplated on telling her about it, not really wanting to inform Rukia out of all people in person. He knew that Renji was friends with Rukia even before they became a Shinigami, which made him uncomfortable to break the news. He sighed, coming to the conclusion that it was an inevitable subject, be it now or later. Aburaya was the one who left my mom and I to die to Grand Fisher almost 9 years ago. While there was another factor to my mom's death, if he actually chose to do his job, my mom would have lived that day. She wasn't someone who deserved to die and suffer at the hands of Kuretsuchi even after her soul reached Soul Society. Just so you know, I'll probably kill him when I see him. Ichigo said, with a scowl. He didn't hate Renji as much as he did when he learned the truth, but he still held a grudge. And he had more than enough reason to kill him, compared to the unseated level Shinigami he had killed. I don't know what to say. Renji wouldn't have, but, Rukia stuttered in disbelief and confusion. Ichigo sighed and lifted his reishi sword. Anyway, I have my own tasks to do. We'll meet again soon enough, Rukia. Rukia looked like she wanted to protest, only to fall unconscious in Ichigo's arms a moment later. He carefully laid her against the wall where her zanpakuto was embedded, and placed his hand on the blade. You know, I think she's ready to wield you properly. You should give her a chance to prove herself. Ichigo muttered as he ran his hand down the blade, and vanished from the spot. Seconds later, a beautiful woman wearing a kimono appeared and pulled out the zanpakuto from the wall. She had an unreadable expression on her face as she walked over to the unconscious form of Rukia to sheathe the sword. The zanpakuto spirit picked up the petite lieutenant in her arms, and sighed. We will see if the boy was indeed right, Rukia. Soda no Shirayuki said as she thought of the orange-haired human. While not as strong as the bond she shared with Rukia, there was a solid connection between herself and Ichigo which had formed when Rukia had transferred her powers to him. Apparently, Ichigo had found out that she was withholding Rukia from using her zanpakuto to its full potential, just from a short time of clashing his sword against her. Maybe he saw through it, since he himself had the same experience. Rukia had improved immensely over the short span of time after she had met the substitute Shinigami, more so than the decades before that. Soda no Shirayuki knew that she would have allowed Rukia to wield her properly soon enough, but the time had come much sooner than she thought. She could tell that Ichigo was purposely holding back from using most of his powers during the whole fight, even including his physical strength. Rukia would have to become a lot more stronger than she was now, in order to survive through the enemy's next invasion. It's not like she was that far off from achieving Bankai, considering how Soda no Shirayuki could manifest outside of Rukia's inner world on her own with some effort. Soda no Shirayuki disappeared from the scene carrying her wielder, heading towards the 4th Division barracks. While she wasn't grievously injured, there were some small wounds that needed to be treated. Also, Sota no Shirayuki wasn't about to leave her wielder in the middle of the battlefield in her unconscious state. What the? Shaz Domino muttered as he walked through the empty halls of the Shinigami Research and Development Institute. No, empty would be a wrong word, considering the bloody stains on the walls and floor along with a few corpses. He wasn't expecting this when he came to the SRDI to seek out the information, which would allow him to create his own Hogyoku in order to turn himself into a hollow-feed Quincy. He thought that his shrift, the viability, would be more than enough for him to survive hollow poisoning, which led him to gain such an objective. What he really didn't expect was to meet zero resistance in one of the enemy's most important departments. Shaz took his time to search the department's labs, and came to the conclusion that the data he was looking for would be most likely placed in the department president's lab. Shaz eagerly entered the lab, only to freeze at the sight of a black-haired girl wearing their own uniform. Took you long enough. It was so boring waiting here all alone. Oh, you aren't the clown, but I somehow know you. I wonder why, Jazelle said, tilting her head to the side. Sternritter. Jazelle Gewel. Why are you here? And I feel insulted that you don't even recognize one of your fellow Sternritter. Shaz said through his gritted teeth. Jazelle raised one of her eyebrows, and started to giggle like a child. Shaz frowned, not understanding her reaction. Why are you laughing? Oh, it was just so cute that you think of yourself as my fellow Sternritter, as you put it. There are only 27 Sternritter, and you certainly aren't one. Jazelle said through her giggles. I am a Sternritter. His Majesty gave me the letter, Sigma. Which isn't even an English letter. Oh, I recognize you now. You're one of Gremmy's dolls. Jazelle cut off his words, causing Shaz to frown in irritation. He decided to ignore the girl, and search for the data he wanted. Jazz. Your name is Jazz, right? What brings you here? Jazelle asked. Shaz bit his lower lip, and yelled at the girl. I'm Shaz, not Jazz. And why would I even tell you that in the first place? Because I'm gonna kill you if you don't. Jazelle said in a not-so-joking manner, not in the best of her moods. Shaz was about to retort with an insult, only to bite his tongue when he saw the malicious gleam in her eyes. She's fucking serious. I came here to find some information on how to create my own Hogyoku. Shaz replied quickly, not wanting to give any reason for her to actually try to kill him. He knew just how much of a crazy bitch the Sternritter, was. Shaz could feel the sweat rolling off his forehead as Jazelle stared at him in a calculative manner. The zombie, herself wasn't stronger than him, but there was a reason she was one of the most feared Sternritter to the Soldats and even the other Sternritter. While it was true that she had mellowed out considerably over the past year, Shaz wasn't about to be fooled at her mask. One's nature didn't simply change over a short time, the apparent massacre of the SRDI at her hands being a solid proof of it. I don't like the way you're looking at me, Jazelle stated while playing with a lock of her hair. You're looking at me like I'm a crazy, sadistic bitch. Because you are one. Shaz almost blurted out the words, but wisely kept them to himself. It was too bad for him that she was very sensitive on that subject. Jazelle knew that she was in fact both crazy and sadistic, but it had become one of her insecurities nowadays. No matter how much Ichigo showed his love towards her, she feared that he would leave her one day because of it deep down inside. Jazelle hadn't killed or seriously harmed anyone for more than half a year, and today was the first time she had let out her more bloodthirsty nature ever since she started to date Ichigo. Excluding Tsukishima, she wouldn't have overdone it if she had stuck with Ichigo, but she wanted to deal with this accursed department. He had directed most of his hatred towards the clown who controlled this department, but she wasn't going to let any of them off the hook. She was petty as hell, and she would never forgive anyone who had hurt the love of her life. Ichigo probably would never guess that she had purposely informed the soldat who was in charge of the Gate of the Sun, to send Ichigo near the 13th Division barracks instead of the SRDI. Although I'll probably confess it on my own. I am a little crazy, and I may be a bit sadistic. But I'm not a bitch, well, not to you. Jazelle added, letting out a perverse giggle at the thought of all the naughty things she would do with Ichigo. Shaz dropped his guard at the girl's act, only to feel the cold sensation of steel penetrating his flesh. Good doggy. Jazelle complimented the red-skinned man who stood tall behind Shaz. Can I get some blood, master? The zombified form of Tsukishima asked hopefully, which Jazelle didn't even bother to answer. Ha, you can't kill me with this. Shaz's eyes widened as more and more zombies rose up from the shadows, almost reaching 100 in number. I've always wanted to make one of Gremmy's dolls into a zombie, Jazelle said with a dopey smile, and snapped her finger. The zombies responded instantly, and swarmed Shaz like the zombies in the movies do. If you live through this, then maybe I'll leave you be. If you happen to die, well, welcome to my collection. Shaz screamed in rage and started to fight off the zombies, but he wasn't strong enough to hold his own against a near 100 army of Jazelle's zombies. Despite his own belief, he was nowhere near the level of the other Sternritter. It was the limit of Gremmy's, the visionary, even if Shaz had managed to become a being of his own by using the viability. Shaz's shrift was imagined by Gremmy while the other Sternritter's shrift were bestowed by Yhwach, which was a major difference. Jazelle wondered if she would ever get the chance to see the clown during this invasion, humming as she watched her zombies rip apart Shaz each and every time he regenerated himself. She wouldn't have killed Shaz if she was in her usual mood, but she was in a sour mood due to the 12th Division captain's absence in the SRDI. It didn't take any more than 5 minutes for Shaz to drop dead as he reached the limit of his regeneration. Jazelle walked over towards the almost mutilated corpse, and was about to spill her blood on it, when she coughed up some blood. She looked down at her stomach to see a hand sticking out of it, and turned her head to be greeted with the sight of a busty girl with short black hair. Oh, so the clown finally decided to show up. But don't you think it's a little rude to stab an innocent girl like me as a greeting? Jazelle asked, not even showing a hint of being in pain from receiving such an injury. Such remarkable pain tolerance. I shall look forward to having you on my operating table. Nemu, capture the subject alive. She'll pay for the damage she did to my department with her body. Mayuri ordered, only to frown when Nemu didn't move an inch from her current spot. Nemu, you foolish girl. I gave you an order. Mayuri gritted through his teeth in irritation, but Nemu didn't respond. Nemu. The sound of Jazelle's giggles echoed all over Mayuri's lab. If there was something that every single one of the Sternritter agreed on, it would be the fact that Jazelle was insane. Even Ichigo couldn't bring himself to say otherwise, not that she really minded. As long as he loved her like she was the most precious girl on earth, she was okay with almost anything. Of course, that was exactly what he did to her, with Ichigo being Ichigo and all. That single act itself was enough to act as a leash on her insanity. But Ichigo wasn't here with her. Not that just being separated from Ichigo would make Jazelle go mad and kill everyone in her sight. She was using this situation to her advantage, with being in war with the Shinigami and all. Ichigo probably would have wanted her to spare most of the Shinigami she had killed here, seeing how this department was basically under the clown's dictatorship. She simply despised them for their acts concerning Ichigo's mother, and she had loathed the Shinigami even before hearing what they did to Ichigo. The first war, the massacre, the experiments. Would it be wrong of the Quincy to utterly hate the Shinigami for what they did to their race? So Jazelle had simply separated herself from Ichigo, came straight to the SRDI. She killed half of the men she came across, and the other half was now a part of her army of zombies. As long as Ichigo was alive at her side, she was very confident that she could keep her sanity in check. But not to anyone who worked at this accursed department, not to mention the clown who was behind everything. So your name is Nemu. Hehe, will you be a good dear and bring the clown on his knees for me? Jazelle spoke, a sadistic grin adorning her face. Nemu pulled her arm out of Jazelle's stomach, and turned towards the scowling captain. Mayuri noticed that her skin was visibly red, and her eyes barely showed any sign of life with its dullness. Granted, Kuretsuchi Nemu was never that much of a person who could be described as lively, but the way she looked at him was disturbing for some reason. Hi. Mayuri gritted his teeth in anger as his Zanpakuto lashed out, intercepting Nemu's kick, which packed enough power to blast a boulder to pieces. He was pissed over the fact that someone had taken control over his creation. He didn't really care that he would have to deal with Nemu himself. She was replaceable, albeit the task being a troublesome process. You insolent girl, I will promise you that I'll make sure to find about everything about your capabilities on my table in the most painful way possible. It is the price you will pay for daring to take control of my project." Mayuri seethed in fury, even as he dodged another punch from Nemu. Jazelle was about to retort in the most sassy way she could come up with, when a familiar voice could be heard. "I'm afraid not. The day you lay your hands on her will be the day you die in the most painful way possible, as you put it. Although I was going to do that anyway." "Hiya, Ichi-chan. Did you miss me?" Jazelle greeted with her usual smile. "As much as I want to say yes. I'm going to punish you for messing up with my plans, Gigi," Ichigo said as he rolled his eyes. He had figured out the fact that Jazelle had a hand in the change of his emerging point as soon as he saw what she did to the SRDI. The only reason he wasn't pissed off at her was the fact that Jazelle had done it mostly for him. Needless to say that he wanted to be mad at her, but he couldn't bring himself to do so. A major downside of being in love with a mentally unstable girl, I suppose. Ichigo mused to himself. Ichigo wasn't ignorant. He knew that Jazelle was unstable, so it was easy to deduce that a part of the reason she was doing this was to let out her more sadistic tendencies. Ichigo wondered for a moment if he would have been okay with her behavior a year ago. Obviously not, he admitted. "Ah, fine," Jazelle whined with a small pout. Ichigo turned to face the captain, who was busy dealing with his own lieutenant. A sudden surge of cold fury erupted from his insides, but he pushed it down for now. It wouldn't do for him to lose his calm against a foe who specializes in his intelligence. Granted, he wasn't at the level of Aizen or Kazuki, but it didn't change the fact that the man was extremely intelligent. Mayuri cursed to himself, as he regretted installing all the counters to his own abilities to Nemu. She was immune to most kind of poison, including the one of Ashizogi Jizo. She held not only the antidote to the poison of his Bankai, but the girl who took control over his creation had the means to steal his Bankai. Of course, he had a fail-safe. He could easily destroy the seventh of his Nimari project, but for some reason he couldn't bring himself to do so. It was then he realized that he had unwillingly become attached to his own creation. "You insolent fools. Do you have any idea how much time and effort it will cost me to create another one of her?" Mayuri drawled, the assault of Nemu coming to an abrupt stop at the same time. He visibly showed his anger at the situation, something that could only be brought out with the mention of Kazuki in his presence. A small capsule embedded in Nemu's heart cracked, and spilled its content into her blood the moment Mayuri reached out to it with his Raryoku. The capsule was designed to break only when it came into contact with his own Raryoku, only after he removed the defenses that were installed into her body as a safety measure. It was supposed to destroy Nemu's body, the only exception being her brain, which could be used to jumpstart the process of creating his eighth Nimari. "Why, hello to you, Kuritsuchi Mayuri." Ichigo managed to not spit out the words, but he couldn't keep it void from his negative emotions. "Seeing how you aren't that surprised to see me, I suppose Yamaji told you." "I'm rather flattered that he took the effort to actually remember my Reiatsu signature," Ichigo said coolly. "You're different, boy." Mayuri eyed the Sternritter carefully, noticing that he was completely different from the naive young Ryoka he remembered. He knew that humans tend to overtake changes in a short span of time, while the souls usually didn't. But it wasn't even 3 years since the boy had lost all connection with the afterlife. Associating himself with the Quincy had molded him into a soldier, something he doubted to ever happen under the Gote 13. The boy was a wild beast, an untamable being who held some, if not many similarities to the beast of the 11th Division. "How could I not be different? I was a schoolboy back then," Ichigo responded with a scowl, and spoke again just a moment later. "Now, I'm a soldier. I'd rather skip the needless details, since you of all people would know better than anyone of the reason I joined His Majesty. I would have joined him regardless of what you did, but it did strengthen my resolve. HMMPH. And the head captain was hanging it over my head as if I were to blame." Mayuri muttered in disdain, and turned his attention to the zombified form of Nemu who had started to cough out her blood. Whatever that insolent girl did to Nemu, it made her immunity much stronger than it initially was. She should have collapsed in mere seconds, but for her internal organs to survive this long. I simply must see the extent of her abilities with my own eyes. Ichigo scowled at Mayuri's implication of dissecting Jazelle. He wanted to strangle him to death, right then and there. If he dares to lay a hand on his girl, he would find out that his fate would be an unpleasant one. But then again, his fate was already sealed when he dared to do so with his mother's soul. He was brought out of his darker thoughts that involved killing Mayuri in various ways, by the said person's following words. But I suppose you are a far more interesting specimen than she would ever be. A human that was born with all three major aspects of the soul. The infinite possibilities that would come with it. It is no wonder that Aizen held such interest in you, and even prided himself in having a hand in your creation. Mayuri muttered as he picked up the brain of Nemu, who had finally collapsed into reishi. Ichigo's scowl deepened as Mayuri placed the brain of the girl into a glass tank, disgusted at the act. A safety measure on his own subordinate, really. Gods, I'm done with acting all civil with you. You'll die today, and that is all that matters. Ichigo muttered darkly and appeared behind Mayuri with a buzzing sound, his reishi sword in a downward slash aimed to split the man in half. Mayuri intercepted the strike with his Zanpakuto, which wasn't something that surprised Ichigo all that much. Kuretsuchi Mayuri was not a captain for no reason, and even if he was more of a researcher than a fighter, he could hold his own in a fight fairly well. Ichigo pressed the captain to a defensive stance with his sword, each and every slash of it being perfectly connected to his next movement. This time, Ichigo actually found himself surprised at Mayuri to the fact that he was able to keep up with this with ease. No one, and absolutely no one, other than Jugram and the Emperor had been able to do so. He knew that Mayuri wasn't on the same level with Jugram in terms of swordsmanship, but he was proving to be a surprisingly competent opponent. There was a time when he thought of Mayuri as the weakest captain excluding Unohana Retsu, since he was defeated by Ryu with the use of the Let's Still. Of course, he didn't have that much of a high opinion regarding the Quincy back then, but he probably should have known better than to downplay Yuryu's achievement. Let's Still was a sacrificial technique after all. Ichigo's thoughts regarding a Quincy's strength began to change when he started his holy training, and he had realized that a Quincy held as much potential or even more than that of a Shinigami later on. That was when he learned how to use the Quincy, Vollständig. The Quincy, Vollständig was the epitome of a Quincy's strength, the perfected version of the Let's Still. It held much more potential than the Let's Style while losing the sacrificial part of the said technique, thus, Quincy, complete, being its name. It was then he learned that Yuryu's Let's Still must have been powerful enough to overpower a captain, coming to the realization that even the weakest captain was not to be underestimated if he survived through it. Jugram's reminder before he joined the ranks of the Sternritter served to enforce the thought. I see that you are surprised. Perhaps you're wondering why a mere researcher like myself is able to read your attacks so effectively. Mayuri questioned with a small smirk. Ichigo raised a brow, prompting him to continue on. I installed a number of sensors in my Ashizogi Jizo a few hours ago, something I have been working on for quite some time. I've programmed it to detect any kind of blade that enters within 2 feet of my body, and intercept such blades at an angle of 60 degrees or greater. Ichigo stared at him for a moment, and let out a chuckle. Consider me impressed, but you really shouldn't tell such information to your enemies, especially when they're just playing with you. You'll find yourself in a tight spot for that, such as this. Mayuri was stopped from retorting to such a comment when he saw the crimson-red ball forming from the former substitute Shinigami's sword tip. A Sero. As the red beam was released, Mayuri reacted in time and raised his hands. His hands turned into a barrier of some sorts and negated the Sero, if barely. Good job blocking that, but that was me not even trying. Sero Ascuras, Ichigo yelled, his voice distorting into one similar to that of his when he was using his hollow mask. His irises had become golden, with his sclera being black and held a more cruel gleam. Mayuri grimaced and tried to shield himself with some kind of Kido, not trusting his hands to block the much more potent variation of Sero. He almost sighed in relief as the Kido seemed to hold its ground fairly well, only to shunpo out of the way when he heard the cracking of his defensive Kido. He gritted his teeth in rage when the Sero Ascuras destroyed a good portion of his lab. More work for him to do to restore the department back to what it was, with nearly all of his researchers being either permanently incapacitated or becoming a mindless slave of the other Quincy. Don't be so angry with such insignificant matters, Kuretsuchi. You have no right to show any hint of anger for whatever reason in my presence. Ichigo hissed, and bit his thumb. Red markings appeared on his skin, using his blood artery which reinforced the flowing blood with reishi. An almost blinding white-colored sphere formed at his fingertips, drawing power from the extremely potent blood. Gran Rei Sero. Mayuri instantly realized that he probably couldn't survive this technique, even with his ability to shift himself into a liquid form. The liquid would be simply incinerated by such power, exactly like how he would be if exposed to the flames of Ryujin Jaka. But he wasn't going to let himself fall without putting up a fight. Everything he did was for the good of Seraiti, and he knew that it would be doomed if he were to fall in battle to the former substitute Shinigami. Mayuri put up the best protective Kido in his knowledge, even the ones that would be banned if the Central 46 learned the existence of it. Those that involved the sacrifice of a part of his own body, not that much of a risk to him when he can either regenerate or create it. Those that would result in the permanent loss of a portion of his Raryoku, a rather unwelcome sacrifice, but much better than the death of himself. Some would say to him that he was being overdramatic, but Mayuri knew that he wasn't. Someone needed to come up with a solution to the enemy's method of stealing their Bankai, to exploit the weaknesses of the Quincy. If he faces his death at the hands of Kurosaki Ichigo today, no one would be able to save the Seraiti. No, there was one man. The man he loathed with all of his being, the most intelligent man to be born in the last few centuries. The one who was superior to him in every way. He wouldn't have loathed him if he did not care about such petty things such as morals, rather respected him even. But Urahara Kazuki rarely ever dropped his morals, which led to him loathing the said man for being able to do something he wasn't. Kuretsuchi Mayuri was never able to come up with a result better than Kazuki, even when he had no such qualms of sticking to more humane methods regarding his research. It made him feel that much more inferior to the man. All hopes of surviving disappeared from Mayuri's mind when the Sternritter formed a black Heilig Bogan that was similar to Basby's crossbow, complete with its handgun-like handle. Ichigo fired a single Heilig file, but it wasn't the same as the ones the other Sternritter could fire. The power it held was not even remotely comparable to the very first Heilig file he had fired at Yhwach. The white sphere of light collided with Mayuri's protective Kido and was stalled for barely a second when the Heilig file was added, and simply annihilated it and kept going. Jazelle knew that whatever backlash that would come from the technique would be extremely dangerous to herself, and hid herself behind Ichigo, the very place she felt most secure. She watched in morbid fascination as the sphere shrunk into a dot when it made contact with the clown. Did Ichigo's attack fail or something? Her thoughts were proved to be wrong when Ichigo pulled her into his embrace and cut his palm open, spilling out his blood. The jagged blue lines of the blood formed a protective circle around them, and soon rose a blue barrier he had learned from old man Zangetsu. He could have just pulled her into the shadows, but he wasn't about to take any chances when he used his blood-reinforced Gran Rei Sero with his Heilig file at full power. Blood Vene Anhaben, Ichigo muttered, and soon the whole SRDI was engulfed in light. Jazelle shut her eyes as an explosion that even Bambietta would have envied washed over the barrier, completely annihilating everything in the vicinity save for themselves. If there were any survivors in the SRDI after she had gone through it, she was certain that they wouldn't have survived the explosion. As the explosion died out, she realized that the whole SRDI was grazed into nothingness, with a giant crater replacing it. She had to admit, Ichigo had style. You didn't have to pull me into your arms if you were going to use that, Ichi-chan. Another proof of your true nature, taking advantage of the situation to hold an innocent girl like me. I always knew you were a sly dog. Jazelle gushed, only to yelp when she felt Ichigo spank her. Gigi, you've been behaving like a bad girl. If it was anyone else, I would have, never mind. You're just lucky, that I love you too much to do anything. Ichigo groaned, causing the girl to giggle. You can always punish me in bed. I'm all for it, Jazelle answered through her giggles, and quickly added a moment later. I promise it won't happen again. Ever. Ichigo pulled his hood up, and sighed. Well, it wasn't like he expected any different from her. Ichigo released the girl from his arms, only for her to quickly claim her place on his back with her arms enveloping his neck. Always so eager. I'll hold you to that promise, Gigi. Not that I'd be all that mad if you do break it. Ichigo wisely kept the last part to himself. Jazelle responded by burying her head into his neck, even if there was no way she could do so more than it already has. Ichigo tried to search for the Reiatsu of the bastard who wronged his mother, and sighed when he couldn't. Probably the first blood of the enemy captain on his hands, and preferably the last if he could help it. He quickly pushed the thought out of his mind with a scowl. He was on the Quincy's side, and the Shinigami were their enemies. While he'd rather see his old friends live through the war, he would take his fellow Sternritter's side any time of the day. Well, most of them, actually. He had known what he was getting himself into, and he shouldn't cloud his judgment with such thoughts. Ichigo abruptly left the now ruins of the old SRDI to his next destination with Jazelle hanging on to his back. While he may have not approved how Jazelle basically massacred the entire department, he felt some relief that this accursed department was no more. Chojiro, you must be rolling in your grave for this. I understand your anger, all too well, Chojiro. Your Bankai, the Bankai you honed with all your might. Flames. That was all Driscoll could see at the moment of his death. The fury of the feared head captain of the Gote 13 Yamamoto Genryusai, released into the form of his very nature. The overwhelming flames was far greater than this pathetic imitation. Yamamoto roared. As the charred remains of the Sternritter fell to the ground, Yamamoto was finally able to send off his fallen lieutenant properly. Farewell, Sasaki Chojiro. I shall forever remember you, for all you have done for the Seraiti. For myself. Hitsugaya Shuhei could only blink as he felt the head captain's rage through the blazing Reiatsu. The massive flames behind him was portraying his fury, not only for his lieutenant, but for all the fallen, and to be fallen. Fear not, I shall strike down every last one of these invaders. With my own hands, Yamamoto assured Shuhei as he passed by the lieutenant, and launched himself into the air. As the blazing red Reiatsu of the head captain trailed behind him, the whole Seraiti came to the realization. Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni was furious, and the tide of the war was about to change. Or was it? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, as well as checking out the author on fanfiction.net.